Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today we are going to be talking about the latest Cards expansion, and more specifically we're going to be talking about the rotation that is going to be happening with the latest Cards expansion. So I'm recording this about an hour or so after they announced it, and the newest expansion is Covert Operations. So I will be doing a video shortly, either later today or possibly tomorrow, looking at the first set of cards for Covert Operations that they've showed off so far, but I want to start off by looking at the rotation list, what cards are going out, what cards are going in, because often this is more impactful than what new cards are existing, and for people currently playing the game who are free to play and might not be getting a lot of the new expansion cards, oftentimes it's what cards are they losing, what cards are they getting back, what cards do they get to keep. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Here is just the article they released. So with the reserves, there's a couple things to keep note of that, just, you know, if you're not familiar with reserves or in case you forget. But cards are, all of the cards that are being rotated are handpicked with specific things in mind, with what future expansions are going to look like, what themes future expansions are going to look like, what strategies are kind of seen too much of recently, or what strategies are people tired of, stuff like this. So just because a card is going does not mean it's going to be gone forever, because cards get brought back either in their original form with the expansion, or what they seem to be doing, what they seem to want to be doing more of in the future is bringing cards back between expansions that are reworked, cards that would never come back in their original form but are going to be reworked just to throw in more cards and bring back iconic arts or iconic card names, etc. So cards cannot be rotated until they've been in the game for at least a year and a half. So all of the new cards from new expansions are going to be safe for a while. This expansion, I believe, is the first expansion where World at War cards could be rotated. I could be wrong about that, but there's a lot of World at War cards that were rotated this expansion. And then with the next expansion, we will start to be able to see the sort of second wave of cards, expansion cards, begin to be able to be rotated with, is it Brothers in Arms? Yeah, I think Brothers in Arms maybe is the most recent one. But there's no Brothers in Arms cards that are being rotated yet, and there are cards coming back. So we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to give you my thoughts, what it's going to mean for, you know, the meta, as much as we can predict that without seeing all the new cards, of course, and what it might mean to you, as well as the cards that are leaving, and, you know, just general thoughts. So with that, let's run the intro and jump straight into it.
What a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legends. J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alright, so first we're going to be looking at the cards that are coming back. These are sorted by nation, and within the nation they are sorted by rarity. Each nation is getting an elite, except one. I suppose we'll talk about it a bit, but let's... Oops, getting a little ahead of ourselves. Let's start off with Britain. They are getting back Royal Research. So, Research is a card that came out in the Breakthrough expansion, if I recall correctly. And there was 3 researches. There was German research, Britain research, and US research. And basically they are supposed to be these big choose what you want potential credit sinks where you play the 3 cost and you choose to take an immediate 0 cost option or add the 6 cost option to your hand. And then you play the 6 cost, so you've now spent 9 credits on this, and you can take an immediate 0 cost out or add the 9 credit option to your hand, and if you pick the 9 credit, you can play that, and that's now 18 credits into this card that hasn't done anything yet. You can pick a 0 cost immediate out, or you can add a 12 cost big finale card to your hand, and if you play that, you've then spent 30 credits on one card. And the idea was supposed to be that spending 30 credits on one card is really, really bad, because you're not affecting the board state. However, it's really easy to stall out your opponent and just get into situations where spending 30 credits on one card isn't bad, it's insane value generation because the thing at the end of the road is insane. Now, research cards were way too strong and then they were nerfed. I was a very big proponent in nerfing research. And then they still continue to see play because they're just very good cards that are very flexible. The German research, the British research can go into almost any deck. The US research is a little harder because it has two basically bad options. Well, no, it has one bad option, really. So all of the researches were rotated at once, and now they're all coming back. So we will see German research and US research. Just talking about British research for a moment here. Assuming that, I don't think they've said if these cards are being changed at all. So assuming that this is coming back in its old version, the Bletchley Park, the 12 cost option, is not that great of a win con. And the 9 cost version is very situational. The one that pins all units, increases card cost in enemy hand by 3. It's a good effect, but do you want to spend 18 credits to get that effect? I'm unsure. However, the 0 cost effect, which is heal 4, draw a card, is incredibly good. And the 6 cost effect is the best 6 cost effect in the game, by a large margin, synthetic rubber, which is give a unit plus 4 health and then set its attack equal to its health. It lets you do crazy burst potential, like especially if you get it on like a Black Watch, that's literally just lethal. It becomes a 10-10 Fury. So just having that option is crazy burst potential out of nowhere. It's crazy trade up potential, and otherwise is just a good card that you would run. Like you run Convoy, 3 cost, draw 2. This is 3 cost, draw 1, heal 4. You run Sincerely Yours, 4 cost, heal 6, draw 2. Obviously that's better than research, but would you take a slightly worse Sincerely Yours that is sometimes a win con? Yes, you would. So this card is going to see play in almost every British deck. It's really, really good, but it's not meta warping good. Then we have the 37 anti-air gun, the 37-inch anti-air gun. This is a card that saw very, very limited play for a brief amount of time in like a dedicated pin deck. We have better pin cards in the game now with Forced Surrender. However, as we will be seeing in a minute, Britain, the pin deck is losing its win condition. And this was also run in a very specific point in time where air was still in the game and very, very popular. Whereas air has essentially gone extinct. We still see decks that run air cards, and there's sort of the Soviet air and the Exile air, which are like coming forward a little bit. But I don't think this card is going to see a ton of play, but it's now back in the game, so, you know, you have some things to think about when building pin. And then we have a bunch of countermeasures coming back. So a while ago, they rotated a bunch of countermeasures, and I think I said in the video at the time that made me think that they would release a countermeasure-themed expansion, and that's exactly what we got. Like, we see, and we'll see this in the next video, that there is some direct countermeasure synergy cards. However, you know, covert operations and the countermeasures are coming back into the game. You know, it's thematic. This is what I mean, where cards leave and come back. Aerial Reconnaissance is an interesting one because it has seen play, but it sees play in essentially exclusively combo decks, because of its effect. There's very few ways to reduce the cost of cards in your hand in the cards, and this is one of them, and when used effectively in either like a combo hand or just a all-order hand, if you're playing one of these all-order burn decks, this is a very, very powerful card. And it's going to be difficult to see how much play it's going to see and how much effect it's going to have on the game as when it comes back. Just because this was always a very niche card, but, you know, it's back in the game, so that's cool. Then we have National Fire Service. I wish this card did not come back. I absolutely hate this card. This is a 2-credit British countermeasure. When your HQ receives damage this turn, reduce the damage to 1. So the way this card works is you hold it up, and when it triggers, it triggers when the opponent attacks, and whatever they attack with your HQ with, immediately it only does 1 damage. And then for the rest of that turn, all sources of damage to your HQ is only 1. So, you know, if you have a 5-unit board and you're going to Blitzkrieg for 25, now it's only 5 damage, because all of those 5 units are only dealing 1 damage. So this is an insane card at stopping OTKs, at stopping big burst potentials, but that's not how, it's not used as like a tech anti-burst, anti-OTK card. It is used as a stall card in OTK decks, because, you know, if you need to set up a turn where you're like, I don't know, you're doing research or whatever you're doing. You're sinking your credits into your combo, setting it up for the following turn, and then you, with 2 credits, you hold up National Fire Service, and you're almost certainly not going to die. And if you include this with healing, like if you play Fortification National Fire Service, that's 5 credits, you're at minimum 8 health, which means your opponent needs 8 unique sources of damage to the HQ that turn to kill you. So it's essentially just 2 credits you don't lose next turn. Which is really, really good at a standard in combo decks. I really hate this card just because I think it's really toxic for the game and for the nation it's in. That being said, what British combos are going to exist in the current meta, I'm not sure. I'm not saying that this card is going to be toxic or broken immediately in this meta. I'm just saying I don't like this card because it's not going to see play in fun, normal decks. It is exclusively going to see play in very, very toxic decks. So I wish this card had stayed out of the game, personally. Then we have Interception. This is a fun card. It's a standard from the basic set. I'm sure a lot of people have this card. And when they rotated, there was the alternative, Secret Operatives, which is 1 credit. Counter an enemy order targeted at a friendly unit and give that unit +2 health. Interception targets any friendly target, so this can stop things that are targeted at the HQ. Stop orders that are targeted at the HQ. And in Winter War, I believe they had Close Call, which is a 2 credit countermeasure that stops deployment effects or orders that are targeting a friendly unit. I think it's a unit. Based on me not knowing what the thing is, I think that tells you how much play that card has seen. And Interception, it's not going to see a ton of play. It really hasn't seen a ton of play. It's just worse than Secret Operatives because almost nothing targets the HQ except for Commonwealth. And it's never really been that much of a tech card. And, that's not going to be too much of an issue moving forward, as we will be getting to. So this is just a fun card to have back. It's another thing to think of when you're playing around countermeasures. But it's not really going to have any impact. And then let's get on to Germany. So Germany has German research, and German research is probably the most flexible of the researches. Actually, that's not true. Britain. But German research, the base version is Flying Bomb. So it's 3 credits, destroy an enemy unit that costs 3 or less. And that's just really, really good removal. Now, since this card was rotated, the meta has moved towards being based around 4 credit units. However, I don't think that's going to continue very much, and we've already seen the nerf to the Panzer Grenadiers. The Panzer Grenadiers, as the body, is not as much of an issue as it was before. It's really, the buffed up 35T, and that will still die to Flying Bomb. So Reich Research, I think, is going to see play in any German control, absolutely, because the tier 3 option is destroying a unit and discarding 2 cards. And it could see a lot of play in mid-range decks. Like, I think you would play this in, the German-US mid-range, the German-Japan mid-range, probably. Just because this is better than Sudden Strike. It costs 1 more credit, but it hits a much wider range of units, including you're starting to get guards in there. So, there's some 3 credit guards. And also just, some 3 credit big guys, like the 989, the 5.5, or, there's some annoying elites at 3 credits, like the Soviet artillery. Flying Bomb's really good. The Stage 3 is really good. Stage 2 is underrated, but not good. And then Stage 4, Urine Project, is underrated, as in I've, never seen anyone pick it, and there's situations where picking it is better than Tier 3. But that's very, very rare. And it's much worse than the other Tier 3s. So yeah, this card's going to see a lot of play. If you have it, welcome back. If you don't have it, I wouldn't drop a wild card on it immediately. I'd wait and see, but, if you open this in a pack, it's a ton of fun. Also coming back is Arado. Now, this card I'm very happy to see back. It is just kind of a broken card, I'm not going to lie. 1 cost for a 1/2 fighter draw card is really good. Now, obviously, it is a conditional draw. The opponent needs to have equal or less units on the battlefield than you. But that's really, really easy to do. And it also draws an order, which, could be it's not. It's a conditional draw, and it's a specific draw. But specific draws are generally good. So, Feigned Retreat, spoiler alert, Feigned Retreat is not coming back in this expansion. So, the errata into Feigned is gone. There's no reason to run errata with just, like, 2 or 3 orders anymore. Unless we can figure out some other broken combination with this card. But this is just a really good card in any range of decks. Like, you run this in discard or control just because you can throw it out on turn 1. It goes toe-to-toe with your opponent's 1-drop. And it replaces itself in your hand, and, it sort of gives you an extra mulligan, almost. Like, if you don't find your sudden strike in your mulligan, you play errata, maybe that draws you a sudden strike. So it's just a really powerful card. It's also good in aggro, even though you're trying to pressure the board, but usually the orders that you run in aggro are really big swing cards, like big AoE buffs, or burn, or removal for guards and whatnot. So errata, really, really strong card. I'm glad it's back. It's a ton of fun. And it's absolutely going to see play. Also back is a lot more countermeasures. We have Lightning Strike. I'm not super happy about this card coming back. I don't think it's particularly good. But this card was exclusively played in the German-France burn deck, where you would just run all of the burn cards to the HQ. You'd run basically no units. You'd run basically no removal. And your goal would be try to kill your opponent from hand with countermeasures and burn cards by, like, turn 6 or 7, and hope that your opponent can't kill you by turn 6 or 7 through your countermeasures. And Lightning Strike was one of these cards, where if they draw a card, it deals 4 damage to the enemy HQ. This card's not going to see a ton of play, even inside that burn deck. But, like, if your opponent sees you're playing a burn deck, they're going to know Lightning Strike is there and not draw cards if you're holding up credits. So it's really difficult to get this to trigger. And if you're not getting it to trigger, you'd rather just be running Careless Talks, or something that situationally could be affect the board, let the game go on longer than Lightning Strike, if you're otherwise just going to be discarding it. But, it's a countermeasure. Then we also have Retaliation. It's another burn-themed German countermeasure. This one is more likely to see play than Lightning Strike, I think, if a burn countermeasure deck can exist, just because it is harder to play around. And you can try to control, like, your opponents having cheap units on board. And obviously there's going to be some things like Type 94 that can just be played from hand, deal 1 damage to trigger Retaliation. But a lot of decks don't have that. So depending on what the meta is, like, if you're against Brit Ramp, where the only thing hitting you in the HQ is going to be like a Halifax or a B24D, this is suddenly 2 credits guaranteed 6 burn, or 5 burn. And that's quite a lot better. Now, I don't think this card is good, and I don't think this card is going to see a lot of play, because I assume the countermeasure deck that we're going to get, based on what they've revealed so far, I'm going to assume is more based around using countermeasures to control the board and disrupt your opponent's removal, rather than just like a full burn strategy. But you never know. Then we have the 1st Infantry Regiment. I have nothing to say about this. It was never played, and then it was rotated, and now it's brought back, and I don't really know why. Like, surely there was, like, other standards that never saw play but have higher chance of seeing play that they could have picked instead of this. Yeah. Weird to me. Then we get to Japan, and the Japanese elite that they're bringing back is Desperate Measures. And, oh boy, is this card really, really strong. Like, this card is just, like, actually insane. And this card was played in every single Japan deck from when it was revealed to when it was rotated. Like, regardless of archetype, this card was just absolutely insane. Because 2 credits deal 2 damage to all enemies is really, really powerful. It's, like, the best AoE that's not 10 cost in Japan. It deals damage to the HQ, so it's good for burn and, like, getting over the finish line in an aggro deck. And losing a credit slot, it's bad, but, like, you're not playing this on turn 2. You're playing this on, like, turn 6, turn 5. And if you're gonna then win in 4 turns, 3 or 4 turns, that's not losing out on a lot of credit slots. And if you're an aggro deck, you're not gonna be, it's not preventing you from playing a 7-cost card. It's preventing you from playing, like, 2 3-cost cards and a 1-cost card. You can only play 2 of those things now. And that's fine, because you got the massive tempo swing from Desperate Measures. And if you're a control deck, you're typically playing this to destroy your opponent's board. And yes, it loses you a credit slot. And yes, you might have more expensive cards that you are now not going to be able to get to for an extra turn. However, if the tempo swing blows aggro off the board, that is more than good. That is like the main thing you're looking for, regardless of big cards. So Desperate Measure is absolutely insane, and it will see a ton of play when it comes back. And also, in the cards revealed so far, again, check my channel, subscribe to see that video when that comes out. But it seems like losing credit slots might be a sub-theme, or like an archetype for Japan this expansion. So it makes sense that they would bring back Desperate Measures as sort of the main lose a credit slot card. I think for a long time it was the only lose a credit slot card. I don't remember if that's still true or not, but it's certainly by far the best one that they've ever released. And then they are bringing back Takasagi. This one I'm very excited about because this is just a very good card. Like, this is one of the best cards Japan Control ever had. The very brief periods of time Japan Control existed as an archetype, Takasagi was in that deck. And then they rotated it because, you know, discard is not an incredibly fun mechanic. And also there was getting some discard fatigue just because there was a lot of discard going around. Discard was very meta. So, you know, they took a Takasagi and Japan Control fell off a cliff. And now they're bringing it back. So I'm excited to see what possibilities you have with the Japan Control, or even just like Japan Midrange. This card was popular in Japan Midrange for a while because 2/6 is really annoying at stopping your opponent. Like, it's protecting your like heavier hitting units from a lot of unit trades. Like, you know, you can't 5th Rangers into this, you can't Schutzen into this. And then at the end of that, you discard a card from their hand, which is quite disruptive. Even if it's not hitting anything amazing, the fact that your opponent has to think about that, and, you know, like, do they spend credits drawing cards to dilute their hand to avoid discarding their good card, or do they play their good card prematurely to avoid it being discarded? Like, just Takasagi makes your opponent think in a lot of different ways, and even if it's not directly winning you the game, it's a very, very fun card and a very, very good card. Also coming back is For Prosperity. This card never saw any play. It looked like they were going to try to make a mono Japan theme at some point, and then it looked like they pulled the plug on that, and they changed all of the cards except for Prosperity that were mono Japan themed, and then they rotated For Prosperity. They're bringing it back. I doubt that this means that they're going to be pushing mono Japan anytime soon. I think they just brought it back because they were looking for a non-offensive card to bring back that feasibly could see play, and this feasibly could see play at a very specific meta. It's difficult to imagine you ever not playing German Ally in a Jaguar deck for 35 Ts and 22nd Infantries, but, you know, maybe in the future, maybe they rotate a bunch of stuff, maybe they bring in a lot more good Japanese cards, and you want to run For Prosperity for a cheap buff. They're also bringing back Long Range Recon. This card does not shock me that it's coming back. It was sort of the core theme around, or the core card in Japan-Poland Control, and Japan-Poland Control was a good enough deck that it saw some play, but it was not oppressive, it wasn't super popular, and when they took away Long Range Recon, it killed the deck, and everybody stopped playing it, so I'm not that surprised that it's coming back. It's also one of Japan's only heal cards in the game. So this card is going to see play. People are going to try Japan-Poland Legions again. I've actually been playing Japan-Poland Legions on ladder and having a lot of success with it, but it's a much more aggressive version of the deck that wouldn't run Long Range Recon even if it was in the game. So maybe that version continues. Maybe we get 2 streams of Japan-Poland Legions. That'd be really cool, because I think Japan Control is pretty neat, and I would love to see it. Then we have Imperial Strength. So Imperial Strength is an anti-countermeasure card. So it's sort of coming back, I guess, as an anti-countermeasure tech card. It's also burn, but I don't think there's really going to be burn strategies in the game. I don't know exactly how you would make this work. But Imperial Strength, 1 credit, deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ, discard all activated countermeasures. If it sees play, I imagine it's going to be based on the first one if countermeasures are really popular and you run this as like a 1 or a 2 of. Just because it's like a 1 credit panic button of like, you discard all of their countermeasures, and also just you don't have to play around countermeasures anymore. And, you know, like, to deal 2 damage in an aggro deck can be a bit of reach. You're definitely not running 4 copies of this in any aggro deck, even no matter how popular countermeasures are, unless just healing disappears from the meta, but I don't imagine that's going to happen. Then we get on to Soviet cards, and Soviets are not getting back any specials, and they're not getting back any elites, and I'm not entirely sure why. So, like, I understand that it's not going to be always symmetrical. Like, if I remember correctly, I think Soviets didn't get a special rotated. Like, they had one less special rotated last expansion than all the other nations. I forget exactly how it works, but it's always been slightly asymmetrical. This is the most egregious asymmetrical thing they've done so far. The fact that Soviets are not getting back any specials or elites is bizarre to me. Now, some of them I understand. So, for example, Zhukov, you're not going to bring back the 1-credit general unless you bring back all the 1-credit generals. Or First Rifles. That card was absolutely broken and should not come back to the game. But, you know, you can bring back Siberian Transfer, and that's not really going to have too much of an impact on the game. It's going to work with Upgrade now. Because you introduced an 8-credit tank last expansion, that would have been cool, to have that interaction in the game. But no, they get absolutely nothing. Same thing with the specials, like the Urob coming back could be very interesting, but nope, that's gone. Instead, we get MiG-3, which is another countermeasure synergy card, and this one is absolutely terrible. If this card cost 0, it would be played. However, you can't, like, unless you're playing, like, turn 1, triggering, like, double evasive action somehow, and then you drop this. This isn't coming out on 1. This is not coming out on 2. It would, like, be ludicrously difficult for this to come out on 2, and that would require you running this in your deck, and unless ladder is, like, 90% countermeasures, you're not going to run this card in your deck. There is a 4-cost, 4/5 fighter vanilla, and that doesn't see play in the Soviet air decks. So you're not going to be playing this. This card is absolutely atrocious. I don't understand why they brought it back. This is just depressing. Then we have 40-second rifles. This is one of those, like, terrifying cards at low ranks because its potential is incredible. It has ambush and it heals like on a regular basis. Like, every turn it will fully repair. So if you can start stacking some buff cards on this, you can get out of hand very quickly, but it's never seen competitive play outside a very niche situation, which was not running it for this effect. It was running it because it was a 3-cost Soviet infantry. So this is an interesting card. Now that rotation is slightly lowering the power level of expansions, or the meta, I should say. That seems to be the case. Maybe there's a world where this card could be playable. And, you know, it's also just a really good pickup for grinding Soviet levels on, like, free-to-play. Just because it's a good card. Like, it's not going to get you too far, but it's a card that if you know what you're doing and you know how to play the game properly, you can get a lot of effort, or a lot of value out of this card. So I'm happy that this card's coming back. We also have Lesser of Two Evils coming back. This one's good. I'm happy that we're getting more options for self-discard, and I'm happy that Soviets are able to get card draw that is non-standard. Like, they already have some non-standard card draw, but I'm glad that Soviets are able to get card draw that is not 5-year plan or By the Sword. Now, this card has seen a ton of play in a variety of decks. Its most recent play was in combo decks, where, you know, you'd run, like, 30 stall cards and, like, 6 draw cards and then 4 combo cards. And you'd stall, and then you'd play Lesser of Two Evils and discard one of your, like, 6 stall cards in hand and continue to stall and continue to draw. And it just got you deeper in your deck. Yes, it's 2 credits, it only draws 1 because you have to discard, but it still draws you 2 into the deck. So if you're looking for specific cards in your deck, it's 2 credits, draw 2. And if the card you're discarding has synergy, like if it's a supply chain, or if it's a Betty or a Ginja or whatever it is, then it's 2 credits, draw 2, get value. So this card has a lot of potential. It's sort of like a big brain card in terms of deck building. There's a lot of deck building possibilities to do with this card, so I'm glad that it's back in rotation. Then we have 6th Naval Brigade. I have no words. Soviets don't get any specials back, they don't get any elites back, and then they get 6th Naval Brigade and MiG-3 back. There's good Soviet cards that are rotated, and Soviets are the least played nation competitively right now. So Soviets better be getting the most broken cards this expansion for this to be justified. I'm at a loss. But 6th Naval Brigade, it's better than Himeji Regiment. That's not saying a lot. I did run this card. I hit rank 1 on ladder. Like, not end of season rank 1, but I did hit rank 1. Like, I hit, like, 2,900 with this card once in, like, 2020. It was, like, a Soviet aggro deck. I just spammed all of the cheap infantries and, like, it was basically tokens, but without tokens. Yeah, no, this card is absolutely terrible. I have no idea why it's come back. Then we have the 89th Infantry Regiment. This card is also terrible, and I also have no idea why this card came back. Again, like, look at what Soviets are getting. They have... This card's absolute trash. This card is not competitive, but, you know, it's fine. This is, like, an okay card to bring back. This is, like, a normal rotation card to come back. This card is interesting and playable. This card is absolute trash. This card is absolute trash. And then we get on to US. So, US has... US Research, and this card I absolutely hate. This is probably my least favorite of the research cards after they nerfed Bletchley Park. Bletchley Park was the absolute worst. But what I hate about US Research is it's basically always 3 or 12. And the 3 is give your gain a credit slot and give your HQ smokescreen this turn. So it's basically just a panic button. It's 3 credits, your opponent can't interact with you for a turn. And it's not that good, because it's too inconsistent to, like, sort of mulligan for and ramp. You'd rather just play War Machine on 2 than rely on that on 3 for credit gain. And US doesn't really have any big wombo combo turns or big swings and whatnot, so, like, it's difficult to use for delay of game. Where I saw a ton of play was in the, what's the card called? The 2 credit gain of research, the 2 credit gain of random research that Soviets had. And they would play 3 copies of that. Spy Ring. They'd run 3 copies of Spy Ring in, like, Soviet OTK decks, because if you got Britain, you could play it immediately for card draw and heal, or you'd save it for synthetic rubber. If you got US, you could play it immediately for credit gain and stall, and that was the entire point of the deck, is you'd stall. And if you got Germany, you'd just play it for removal. Or you could go into stage 2 and use it for plus 10 credits on the following turn to sort of open up your options for comboing. So all 3 researches were very, very useful for sort of these Soviet combo decks, and this one saw a lot of play. And you might be thinking, well, they brought back research, why didn't they bring back Soviet Spy Ring, especially considering that Soviet got absolute garbage? I'm very happy they did not bring back Spy Ring. I hated Spy Ring. That was too much, because it would exclusively see play in combo decks that are exploiting just getting a ton of these research cards, and just using their tier 1 effects, or it would be played in just the greediest Soviet control decks, because they were like, well, if my opponent's an aggro, I play the other cards in my hand, or I play synthetic rubber and, you know, try to get death charges to stay alive for a turn. Or you would, if your opponent was controlled, you would just, like, greed out and do Spy Ring and then go to tier 12, or, like, the 12 cost tier on, like, all of them, just to generate tons of value. Both of those are really, really stupid. So I'm very glad they did not bring back Spy Ring. US Research, though, the tier 4s, you get the 2 nukes, and that's really, really powerful. It's probably the best option out of Research right now in terms of, like, the highest value option out of Research right now is probably the 2 nukes, and Ramp will love those. On the other hand, with Spy Ring not coming back, you have to play US main, and that is something that people don't like to do. They like to do British Ramp, or they like to do Soviet Ramp with US ally. So, you know what? If there is US main ramps, I hate playing against Ramp, and I hate playing against US main Ramp in particular, because they tend to be greedier and worse against aggro, and more punishing against control. And now they have Research back. So, yeah, you know, if they had only brought back German and British Research, I would have been happy. And then the US gets Patriotic Zeal. This card never saw any play outside of, like, super, super niche meme OTKs. And I think that's gonna be the same. I'm a little surprised they brought this card back when there's other options. Then they brought back Sniped, because it's a countermeasure. This card saw technically saw play. I brought it to an OCC once in just as the 40th card of a US-France unitless deck. And just because I needed a 40th card, and it needed to not be a unit, and it needed to be able to remove something. So I picked Sniped because I'm like, you know what? They play a big guy who I can't deal with. I hold up Sniped, the big guy gets sniped, and then I remove it with something else on the following turn. Sniped is a really, really bad card. Now, it's like actually okay in draft if it catches you off guard. The problem is it's very inconsistent. Everything playing on ranked is going to have blitz cards that can just blitz out the smallest guy and attack with snipe, and then it might actually buff something. And if it gets ever meta at any point, it's going to be very, very obvious you're holding it up because they will float 2 credits on a turn where you have a big guy on board. So yeah, sniped, not going to see any play. And then last but not least, they brought back Land of the Free. And you might be thinking, well, why'd they bring back Land of the Free? This card has never seen any play. Like, it's just going to be another junk card that never sees play. I will say, I actually looked up Land of the Free a couple different times over the last, like, 12 months. Because I'm like, maybe I can make this work. And then I look it up and I realize it's rotated. So, it's probably going to continue to not see play. Like, it's not that good of a card. It's just too low value, and there's not enough decks in the game right now that really want to get this. Like, you'd rather just play Bolster. However, maybe. I'm going to be experimenting with this card, so I'm glad they brought it back. And those are the 24 cards that they are bringing back. So overall, you have Research. Like, all the control decks are getting Research again. You have Lesser of Two Evils, which, like, maybe combo decks can play. But again, like, what combo? Like, you have Great Patriotic War in the game still, but what else are you doing with it? Long Range Recon, so Japan controls getting some options. That's probably the most exciting thing for Japan. Desperate Measures is probably going to be the most played card that is returning. And, yeah, Arado is a big one, and that's basically it. Like, you have the Research, Arado, Desperate Measures, Takasaki. Like, the researchers are there. The researchers are big. So this is, probably the most impactful return of cards we've had so far, just because this is, what, the second? But, you know, there's going to be some new toys to play around with, because these are going to come out on top of the cards in Covert Operations. And you can, if you don't own these cards already, you can open them in Covert Operation packs, and if you do own them already, there's full duplicate protection, so you don't have to worry about opening duplicates. But that is enough about what is leaving, about what is returning. Now let's talk about what is leaving the game. And first up, because once again, these will be in order of nation and in order of rarity. And the first up is the card that's got a lot of people talking in the Discord, Commonwealth. And this one I find very amusing, because as Commonwealth was in the game and seeing a ton of play, there would be constant posts about people complaining about Commonwealth, saying it's too strong. I've heard, like, even from, like, pretty high-ranking players that Commonwealth is broken. Commonwealth is too strong. Commonwealth is too much of a win con. It's too easy to reach 30 health. It should be 35 health. Or it should only deal 15 damage and require Britain to deal some chip damage in on there. I've seen all sorts of takes about Commonwealth, and then they announce that it's being rotated, and immediately, just out of the woodworks, you have people being like, if you rotate Commonwealth, what's Britain gonna do? It's like the only British win con. You rotate Commonwealth and Britain is going to disappear off the map. It's an iconic card. It's my favorite card in the game. And I'm not here to, you know, take a side on that issue, but I will provide some context, because I'm sure this is the card that a lot of people, you might have even skipped into the video just to see what I'm going to say about Commonwealth. I will say, Commonwealth is one of my favorite cards in the game in terms of design. I think it's really, really interesting. I love the art, but I think it's really, really interesting. And it's sort of one of the only, like, build your deck around this card win cons in Cards, and I like that. I don't like cards that are win cons on their own, like Old Doubting System. Or not Old Doubting, Old Bletchley Park. That card was just, you play this card and you win the game. Commonwealth is you have to build your deck around it, and both players have an opportunity to interact with it. Now, you can argue about how much of an opportunity they have to interact with your health total if you're playing a ton of pin or a ton of guards, or, you're just able to heal like 40 by turn 10, it's like, how easy is it for them to deal 40 damage or 30 damage to bring you below 30? And so I'm not going to comment really on the power level of Commonwealth, but I will also say that in classic mode, so when it was just the classic cards, not classic mode, but like before expansions, back in 2019, Commonwealth saw a ton of play, obviously. It's the British WinCon. If you're playing a British deck, it's probably running Commonwealth. And then the expansions came out, and Commonwealth stopped seeing play for like 2 years, 2.5 years, because it was just really, really slow. The healing options weren't great. The stall options weren't great. And almost every deck in the game could consistently bring you below 30. It was very difficult to get above 30. And if they did get above 30, then if you were able to get above 30, they probably got themselves above 20. And then you just can't win. So Commonwealth saw absolutely no play. And in this 2-year period, 2.5-year period, where nobody was playing Commonwealth, people commented on how bad the card was. They said it was unplayable. They said it cost too much. The fact that it takes an entire turn and like any disruption to the cost of your cards means you can't play it. The fact that it only does 20 damage, it should deal more damage. It should win the game. It should just say win the game if your HQ has 30 or more defense. Some people said that 30 was too high. It should be like 28 or 26. Again, so some people said it should cost 10. It was just the exact opposite of the conversation we've been having for the last 6 months. And then they released a bunch of cards that made Commonwealth better. They released more healing. They released more guards. They released credit denial, which you could credit denial your opponent, and then Commonwealth, because they have not had the same opportunity to, the same credits and resources to bring you below 30 as you have had. And you could combine that with Japan, that could then deal the extra chip damage in case they heal. Also, other decks healing sort of fell by the wayside. And most importantly, and the thing that really brought Commonwealth back onto the stage for the first time, was the supply shortage credit denial. And that was just because you could stall out any board 4 times, and then you need a win con. You play Commonwealth. And that deck saw a ton of play. And then it was nerfed very quickly. But it made people realize 2 things. 1, Commonwealth is better than we thought it was. And 2, credit denial is better than we thought it was. So SSCD went away, but credit denial Commonwealth decks stayed around. And they sort of stayed around in tier 2, and then rotation hit, and that deck wasn't touched at all, but other decks were. So then that deck went up to tier 1, and floated around tier 1, tier 2. And then that deck got nerfed a bit, but then people discovered other ways to do it. And then in Winter War, Commonwealth was not seeing a ton of play prior to Winter War, but it was a core card in a lot of niche British decks, like Britain, Italy, Britain, France. And then they brought in Ramp, and people were just playing Ramp by itself. And then they sort of realized, wait, I'm consistently ending games above 30 health. What if I just throw in a Commonwealth in this deck? And then they realized it was pretty good. But they realized you had to move your deck more around it. And then more people started to put more healing in their decks. They started to make Commonwealth more of a core part of the deck. And then that led to sort of the Tang, like Chinese community, Ramp combo wealth deck, where you actually cut out the bombers and you just run Ramp and a ton of card draw and a ton of healing, and you just try to Commonwealth your opponent as quickly as possible. So yeah, Commonwealth has gone back to seeing a ton of play. Now, with Commonwealth being rotated, a couple things to say. 1, this card has seen a ton of play. Now, there's a lot of cards that have seen a ton of play that are not rotated and might never be rotated, like Leopold, for example. But Commonwealth has seen a ton of play. The second thing is, Commonwealth will 100% come back. Like, I don't have a dev telling me that, but I'm just saying, Commonwealth will 100% come back. The card is too iconic, the name is too iconic, the art is too iconic, and it's just one of the cards for cards. It came out in the first set, and it is like a card you build your deck around. This card will come back. There is no way the cards devs will leave this card out of the game for very long. Now, it might be 6 months, it might be 12 months, I don't know. But this card will absolutely come back. So if you have this card and you love Commonwealth decks, don't worry about it too much. It will be coming back, I can promise you that. Now, this being rotated does shake up a lot of things. It is, and I think shaking up those things is healthy for the game. I think Commonwealth was holding back a lot of other decks because you could be, well, I have the anti-aggro tools, I have the guard, I have the little bit of healing necessary to deal with aggro decks. I have the mid-game threats that can go toe-to-toe with mid-range. And I have the niche removal for specific decks. But the issue is, I can't get myself above like 20, 23 health, 24 health. I can't get myself out of range of Commonwealth plus bombers. So that deck is just completely unplayable because Commonwealth is just very popular on ladder. So I think Commonwealth rotating, very healthy for the game state. And I think it's very healthy for Britain, because what we saw before is Britain was not seeing any play whatsoever, and then SSCD came out, and that was obviously broken, but it made people realize, Commonwealth is actually really good, and it sort of made people realize that playing Commonwealth was good again. And I'm hoping that we're going to have a very similar thing with Commonwealth leaving, where people have been so focused on this card in their deck building for so long that Commonwealth leaves and they realize, there's so many other options for Britain decks that have existed and have been good in the game, but just nobody has been playing them, either because they were slightly worse than Commonwealth, or just because nobody was looking at them because they were too focused on Commonwealth. So I think Britain Control still has a lot to offer outside of Commonwealth decks, and I've seen a lot of people saying, like, well, what's the point of playing healing cards now? This one I find kind of silly because, other nations run healing if they can, and if they can't, they complain about not being able to run healing. Healing is just good for the sake of healing. It's just a good card. We've seen Fortification played in decks without Commonwealth before. So the healing cards are still going to be good. Healing is still just a good thing to do. Against aggro, it keeps them from rushing you down, and against control, it might buy you time to search through your deck for a board clear while your opponent has board advantage, and that's probably going to happen because you're playing Britain. So yeah, I'm very happy about this card. Now, each nation is losing 3 elites, and 4 specials. I think one's losing 3 specials, and 4 limiteds, 4 standards, I think, is the number. But 3 elites, every nation is losing 3 elites. Now, not all of these elites are particularly good. The second British elite that's going is Sunderland, Mark V. This card saw basically no play. I tried it out in a couple decks when it came out. However, it's just a little bit too slow. And the idea is you play this card, and you get it behind a guard, and it starts drawing you cards, and then you don't have to spend credits on playing cards like Convoy anymore, because this guy will just draw you cards at the start of every turn. The issue is, sometimes you don't want to draw cards at the start of every turn, because you can't get cards out of your hand fast enough, or your opponent's going to immediately make their game plan fatigue. And the other thing is, when this card was printed, Rule Britannia was played a lot, and it was the main win condition of British decks. Rule Britannia is the 8 credit, give all of your British units +2 health, and then set attack equal to health. And I think that was in mind when they played Sunderland, is you play a bunch of low attack, high health guards, and then you play Sunderland behind those low attack, high health guards, and then you play Rule Britannia, and it turns Sunderland into an 8/8. The problem is that never happens, because this came out in Breakthrough, and Breakthrough came out with a lot of just good removal cards, a lot of faster cards, and a lot of high value cards. Like, there's better things you can be spending your credits on than playing Sunderland and Rule Britannia. So yeah, this card's going, and I don't think it's coming back. I'm not gonna miss it. Also going is Royal Ulster Rifles. This came out in Allegiance. This card actually saw more play than Sunderland. It saw a decent amount of play in a range of decks, just because it's like a fortification, but a fortification that can fight back, and a fortification that can do stuff against control decks. And like, this was run in Commonwealth decks, but this was also run in decks that didn't run Commonwealth. So they would see, well, why would I play fortification if I could play fortification that comes with a body? The issue is, as time went on, they got a lot better options if they weren't playing fortification. Like, you'd just rather play like a Seaforth Guards, for example. And then also Commonwealth decks just got really good. So it's like, well, why would you play a card that doesn't increase your HQ total and might just be hit by an honorable death? So Royal Ulster Rifles is another card that hasn't seen any real play in like over 3 years, and will probably never come back. Then on to the specials, we have Sterling Mark I. This is a card that saw limited play before any expansions came out, and then basically saw no play. And then actually in Winter War, I've seen it come back a little bit because of people trying it with Halifax, and also just people trying it with a lot of decks right now don't have one damage pings to remove the Gladiator Escort. So it's actually getting, right now in the game, it's relatively easy to stick this against a lot of decks. But now it's being rotated, and, you know, I think that's fine. It's been in the game for a long time. It might come back, it might not come back, but, yeah. Also going is Cromwell Mark IV. This card basically saw no play. People tried it out when it came out, and like every time Pin got a really big new card, people would try out Cromwell, sorry. But the issue is, it's just not that good. Like, you don't want to destroy pinned units, and also, if you're playing Pin, you probably run very few threats, so your opponent is going to have removal for Cromwell. Yeah, it's just an unfortunate card, that really doesn't fit its own archetype, and I'm not going to miss it, to be completely honest. Also going is Afro Anson. This is a Spitfire synergy card that, I mean, Spitfire has never really seen play, and even within Spitfire decks, I wouldn't play this card in Spitfire decks, because why would I play Afro Anson when I could just instead play Convoy? So yeah, this is just a bad card. It's sort of like Cromwell, where it's a bad card in its own archetype, and the archetype isn't good. So Afro Anson is going away. And the last special that's going away is Raid. This card has seen a ton of play and very briefly broke the game with the Deus Vult combo deck. So this card was beginning to see play again in Exile. Some people were like tagging in 1 or 2 copies of this, just, you know, in case you miss a turn, or like you miss a play on curve, or you just like have an extra credit left over at some point. You can just play Raid, and it's massive disruption, and it sort of sticks you bored for a little bit. It is just a disruption card. It's that or a commando card, and you just play it out while you're doing commando stuff to trigger Crusader. And it saw limited play in both uses, and now it's gone, and I think that's kind of fine. Increasing the cost of cards in the enemy hand is really annoying. And it might come back, it might not come back, whatever. Then we have Monsoon Rot going. Hallelujah. I think everybody is happy about that. I have not seen a single person complaining that Monsoon Rot is leaving the game. And yeah, this came out in World at War, which is probably the most broken expansion that Cards has ever had. In terms of just like the most gross, unfun, ludicrously broken cards came out in World at War. And that was because World at War came out in sort of like the parsed expansions. Like, there was time between each expansion, and each expansion only came out with like 7 new cards. It was a weird thing that they were trying out. Thankfully, they did not continue with that because it was pretty bad. But because of that, they wanted to make the power level of each card really, really high so that it would make an impact with a very limited number of cards. And because of that, they ended up just printing the most broken garbage, one of which is Monsoon Rot. This card is just way too powerful. I hope it never comes back without a massive change. And it's an interesting thing, because if you look at a game like Hearthstone, Hearthstone from the very first expansion had an order similar to Monsoon Rot, well, exactly the same as Monsoon Rot, and it cost 2. And it was good, it saw play, but it was not broken. It was not even remotely broken. But Hearthstone is a very different game than Cards. Cards is a game where you have to win on board, and you have to win on board slowly. Units are very, very slow. Also, Hearthstone is a game where you have cards like Commonwealth, where the OTK possibilities of Britain, the class with Monsoon Rot, is very, very high, and the delay abilities of Britain is very, very high. So for people who know Hearthstone, if Equality was a mage card, it would be a lot better. But it's not. So yeah, Monsoon Rot going, very happy. I'm very excited to see what this does for the meta. Because on the one hand, it's going to open up a lot of control decks, a lot of unit-based control decks that are no longer just get rolled over by Britain. This is going to be a much bigger hit to Britain control than Commonwealth, in my opinion. So like how good Britain control is going to be very interesting to see, because no matter if you were Commonwealth or not Commonwealth, you ran 1, 2, or 3 copies of Monsoon Rot. It was just that good. And now it is gone, and let's see what happens and how the vacuum is filled. I'm very excited about this. This is probably like my #1 most excited card to be rotated so far in the game. Also going is Spitfire Mark II. They seem to be removing a bunch of the Spitfire synergy cards. I don't know if this means that Spitfires will come back in the future, like Alpine did, or if they realize that Spitfire is just sort of like a dead archetype and are slowly removing it. I'm not sure, but this card saw a ton of play in the Spitfire deck and only the Spitfire deck. This one was really good just because it was cheaper than all the other ones, so there was often certain credit breaks where you could get this down a turn earlier than any of the other cards. And once on board, you could start hitting the face, you could start trading out, whatever you needed to do. This card saw some play. This card saw absolutely no play. The Cruiser Mark III. I actually did not know what the name of this card was when putting together this slideshow. Yeah, it's a weird, like, aggressive mid-range card for Britain, which has never had an aggressive mid-range deck outside of Air, which would not play this card. It's just really, really bizarre. Then we have the 26th Engineer Regiment. This card saw a ton of play in a wide range of decks, but none that were, like, tier 1 competitive. So it's a really weird card. It's a very fun card, and it was a fun card to theorycraft around, because in theory, this effect is really, really powerful. Like, ludicrously powerful. +2 defense on all units is an incredible effect. And we saw people like No One try this card out 1 or 2 copies in Britain Air. Like, this, they played this card in Britain Air just because +2 health on your air units was really good and worth a slow, crappy infantry. The problem is it's a British card. If this was like an American card, this card would see so much play in frontline, it would be probably nerfed. But it's not. It's a British card, and you can't really do Britain ally mid-range decks, you can't do Britain ally aggro decks, you can't do Britain main aggro or mid-range decks outside of Air, which people tried this in Air, but it wasn't that popular. So I kind of hope they bring this card back one day, just because it's a fun card to theorycraft around. But, you know, it's fine that they removed it. I don't think too many people are going to be too upset. Sort of on theme with the increasing cost of cards in hand, they are rotating Blockade, which has gone through a few different iterations. Blockade at one point, when I started playing the game, doubled the cost of a card in the enemy hand, which was hilarious because sometimes you'd hit Commonwealth and then it costs 24. I'm very glad that it doesn't do that anymore. Blockade is just a weird card where it was never quite good enough to build a deck around increasing the cost of cards in the opponent's hand. And it's a little too low impact to run in something like Commandos. You'd rather play like a Desert Rats or a Naval Power, something like that. And yeah, like once you got into Credit Denial, when Credit Denial first came out, people started experimenting with Blockade in Credit Denial, because it's like, okay, it's similar to denying them a credit if you increase the cost of all cards in their hand by 1. And so you could, like, you know, do Southern Plan, like Blockade, Southern Plan, Blockade, Blockade, Southern Plan, or something. The issue is it's only enemy units, and it doesn't affect the one they top deck, and it's just not that good. And now it's being rotated. Onto the British standards, we have the M3 Grant. This card never saw any play. I went back and looked at the reactions of people when this card was announced, and some people thought this card would be insane. They were like, oh, it's another guard, it's another healing, synergy, massive stat guard for Britain. But it's just really difficult to consistently get to 25 health against the decks that you're going to want a big guard against. And you want to be playing this on curve. And unless you do like turn 3 fortification and then your opponent hasn't done any damage to you by turn 4, with you playing turn 3 pass, basically. Yeah, it was basically impossible to get this guy to trigger on turn 4, and later in the game he was just not that good. 2-op is kind of awkward. Yeah, just never saw any play. Irish Guards, they seem to be going after Pincer. So again, I don't know if this means that we're gonna have a big Pincer expansion in the future or what. But yeah, Irish Guards have Pincer. That's all I could really say about it. This card is trash. If it was Pincer, Fury, and +1 attack, it would see a lot of play. It'd probably be broken. But no, it is just bad. Then we have Supply Shortage. I am so glad this card is gone. I'm more happy that Monsoon Rod is gone. Like, I think Monsoon Rod is a more broken card than Supply Shortage. But oh my goodness, I'm just glad Supply Shortage is gone and the game can breathe a bit. Again, this card came out in World at War. You know what else came out in World at War? Monsoon Rod. You know what else came out in World at War? Southern Plan. Yeah. This expansion was terrible, let me tell you. Like, these series of expansions were absolutely atrocious. And specifically for, like, gave Britain horrifically broken cards, and other nations, absolute garbage. We will see a couple more World at War cards as we go through. But Supply Shortage saw a ton of play in basically every British deck other than Air, and after they rotated Empire Strikes, people tried this out in Air. It originally came out at 2 credits, if you can believe it. When they were talking about this card, at 2 credits, I was like, absolutely not. 2 credits, this card is the best card in the game. 3 credits, this card is really good. 4 credits, this card is probably balanced. And, like, you know, I wasn't the only person saying this, but a lot of people drastically underestimated how good this card was. They were like, well, like, you know, at 4 credits, this is just worse than, what's the 4 credit German root out? Yeah, they were like, this is just worse than root out at 4 credits, because, you know, it does 1 damage, things that have 2 health stay alive, and then they play more units that are no longer affected by the supply shortage. Like, and at 3 credits, it's like basically worse. Like, at 3 credits, it's basically a Tora Tora, and Tora Tora is 2 credits and not played. So why this needs to be 2 credits too? Absolutely not. The fact that this came out at 2 credits is a travesty. At 3 credits, this card was ludicrously powerful. Basically, every British deck ran 4 copies of it because it was that good. In combination with Monsoon Rot. But even if Monsoon Rot rotated and Supply Shortage didn't, you would still see 4 Supply Shortage in basically every British deck because it's a really, really good card. Supply Shortage is a card that could feasibly come back in the future. I don't want it to. If it never comes back, I would be happy. And if it does come back, I hope it comes back at 4 credits, unless the power level of the game has dropped substantially. Risen substantially. But, yeah. This card is gone. Again, this is another hit to Britain. Britain losing Commonwealth, Supply Shortage, and Monsoon Rot is a big sort of... Everything that we know about Britain right now is gone. But there's a lot we don't know about Britain. Like, how good is Commandos? Have people tried playing Commandos? Because there's not a lot of targeted removal in the meta right now. So, like, you know, Commandos might be good. Like, can you build a more board-centric British control deck with something like Italy Ally or France Ally that's not, like, just sort of memeing with the fatigue? And, like, going in on monsoons and supplies? Maybe. We just haven't tried it. Like, Britain has good options that people just aren't trying because monsoon supply Commonwealth is so powerful. Then we have emergency measures. It's just another Spitfire card getting tossed. I think this card got changed at some point, if I remember correctly. Like, I think this card did something completely different, and then they changed it to potentially add a RAF Grand Crew, which made it more playable. Like, it made it playable in the deck. Like, I think before it was, like, discard a Spitfire in hand to deal 4 damage to a unit or something stupid. This made it far more playable. However, again, the Spitfire deck was just never good. So if you were going to play a Spitfire deck, you'd probably have 1 or 2 copies of this in the deck, just as an extra way to get more RAF Grand Crews and cheat out RAF Grand Crews. But, yeah. This card's going. Spitfire seems to be going. Again, might come back, might not come back. Who knows? Who really cares? Then we have Resolute Defense. This card also saw play in the aforementioned Deus Vult OTK deck. I absolutely loved that deck. I, like, played a pretty big role in popularizing that deck. And then the deck got nerfed and this card went back to never seen any play. This is one of those cards where I think, like, if the meta was just slightly different, if the people at the top were slightly different, maybe this card has a big impact on the history of cards competitive. Because I think this is, like, one of those cards that's far better than people think it is. And it just happened to be the decks people saw and played, and then once you have decks that people are playing, people make iterations of that deck, and it's difficult to, like, sort of experiment with things so far removed from the box of what you're used to. But I think maybe this card was, like, one of those things where it's like, was this card good in a tier 2, tier 1 deck, like, 3 years ago, and nobody made it and nobody played it, and now it's being rotated and is going to go down in history as one of those cards no one knows about? Maybe. I think this is a really cool card. If this card ever comes back, I'll be excited, but alas, it is gone. Then we have Observer Corps. This card also came out in World at War, I want to point out. Britain got Observer Corps, Southern Plan, Supply Shortage, and it's not their card, technically, but Southern Plan, and also the Elite Spitfire, the pre-nerf Elite Spitfire that broke the game. Also, the buff to Wellington came out in the same patch that all of these cards came out. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I can make a whole video complaining about World at War. Observer Core, it got nerfed. It's got its teeth kicked in by the nerf to 5 or more. And it saw no play. After that, basically no play. Like, some people would run one of it in the Soviet main push OTK to reduce the cost of either, like, they'd reduce the cost of Great Patriotic War. Sometimes they'd run like 2 copies and use the other one to reduce the cost of like a Naval Brigade or an Armored Train or a Glamour Boys or something. But at 5 cost, it was difficult to make it work consistently. There wasn't really a specific deck you were trying to build this around. It was no longer letting you do turn 2 Southern plans, which was, you know, a good thing for the game. The fact that they're now rotating it after nerfing it seems like a little much. I'm surprised they just didn't rotate it last expansion instead of nerfing it. But I'm glad it was nerfed. Do not get me wrong. And I hope this card never comes back. But it just seems bizarre to me that you would now rotate a nerfed card that was nerfed like a patch ago. Then we get on to the German cards. For the German elites, they are losing the Tiger 1E, or as I like to call it, the Tiger IE. I know there's some people out there who will get annoyed by that, but hey. The Tiger IE, this was a card that saw a ton of play in the expansion and like the following expansion after this came out. Like, this came out in Allegiance, which was like the first big expansion in cards, and this guy was insane. This guy was so difficult to kill because like the only things that really killed it were the US bombers, and the US bombers were too slow against the aggro decks. So Tiger IE was just like a big finisher of like German mid-range decks. And then once Mare Nostrum came out, like the German mid-range deck got nerfed into oblivion and stopped seeing play, but then the Mare Nostrum came out, and German-Italy Control became really popular, and people would play Tiger IE, because you play Tiger IE, and then you put Mare Nostrum on it, and then you win the game. And then that sort of fell out of favor in favor of just stuff like JU, the Panther Gs, etc. And then they released King Tiger, which is like just Tiger IE on steroids, and it's sort of like, why would you run Tiger IE when you can run King Tiger with Mare Nostrum or Bolster or whatever you're doing? And then nobody ever played this card again after that point. Yeah, the issue is deployment effects got a lot better, and non-targeted orders got a lot better from when this card came out. Like, when this card came out, at first, Britain could not kill it. Like, period. Like, Britain literally had, like, you could pin it with Sexton and then pray. Soviets had one card to kill it, which was the Naval Brigade, the destroy a damaged unit, and you'd have to figure out how to damage it first. It would usually like kill a big unit first, and then you'd Naval Brigade it, and like you would keep Naval Brigade for Tiger 1E, and if you saw your Naval Brigade get discarded, you like basically surrendered the game because you knew there was no way for you to remove Tiger IE. Japan had To the Last Man, but again, if you don't want to have to do To the Last Man on a single unit, because that was your one big board clear that you want to do on a big board. And then US had a ton of options, but US just wasn't popular. Now there's like, you know, Monsoon Raw, there's like some really solid deployment, like retreats. There's like Dechuma. When Dechuma came out, that was like a big swing in making this card a lot worse. Yeah, there's just, it just became too slow for the game, and now it's gone. And it's fine. Like, this card has a special place in my heart just because of how much I have seen it play. I probably played the most cards when this card was very popular. But, you know, I kind of doubt this card's going to come back unless it gets changed. And this is not a fun archetype. Like, your opponent not being able to interact with your units is not a particularly fun thing to have in the game. So I kind of hope it doesn't come back unless it's, like, reworked entirely. But yeah, I hope King Tiger is next. I hate King Tiger with a burning passion. Then we have Exploit the Gap. Exploit the Gap is a depressing card that originally came out at 7, and then nobody ever played it, and then they buffed it to 6, and then people continued to never play this card. This card is absolutely atrocious. The issue is, if you're trying to build a deck around it, where you have very few units, so you're getting you're trying to get a specific or a handful of specific units to 0 with Blitz, it requires you to play a deck with very few units. But if you have a deck with very few units, how are you controlling the front line to play this card? And if you're playing a deck with lots of units that just flood the board, Exploit the Gap 90% of the time is 6 credits, get like a 4 credit card, and give a blitz. So it's like 2 credits, give a card, blitz. But that's not good. It's actively bad. So yeah, this card just absolutely sucked. I'm kind of surprised it was still in the game when I saw that it was being rotated. I was like, did they not rotate that at like the first expansion? Because I just never see this card. This card is so bad. Yeah. Honestly, maybe they bring this back completely reworked in the future, because this is such a terrible card, but it has some pretty good art. Like, it has very pretty art. So, like, maybe they bring this card back in the future that does something completely different. I think this is a good candidate for that type of change. And then last but not least, for the German elites, is Jägerbomber. Actually, probably the most. Jägerbomber is an incredibly powerful card. From the moment it was announced, everybody was like, yeah, this card's going to see play in basically every German deck until the end of time. And then it saw play in every single German deck until the end of time. It's one of those cards that it's like it's just outside the range of needing a nerf, because it's an elite and it's not a game-winning effect. So like, it's an elite, it's allowed to have a stronger effect, and its effect does not immediately win the game. So it's just a ludicrously high tempo card. You just play this, you retreat, like your opponent plays a 4-drop, and then you play Jägerbomber, and you probably just win the game, because now they have to replay the 4-drop, and you have a 5/4 fighter on the board, and you can just start going face. Or you like get favorable trades, because you're now upper credit. It's sort of like Admiral Hipper in that way. Like, it doesn't deny the credit, it doesn't deny the draw, but it develops a 5/4 body. And this was really useful for a lot of German decks that otherwise struggled with removal. But it also saw a lot of play in German control decks, because, you know, just playing a 5/4 body into mid-range, you could retreat their big, expensive unit and force them to replay their turn. And against control, you could go for like these huge tempo swings. It could also act as removal for sort of OTK decks with like Comet, or like Blitzkrieg turns and mid-range decks, Heinz decks. This card just saw a ton of play in basically every sort of deck, and it's gone. I would be kind of shocked if this never came back. But on the other hand, like, it's a very basic effect. Like, it's not a unique effect. It's not like a flashy effect. It's literally just return a unit to the hand. So they might just print different cards with more interesting effects and not bring this back, because it's just sort of boringly good. Which is the case with a lot of Soviet cards. There's very few German cards that are boringly good, but this is one of them. On to the specials. We have Dornier being rotated. This card is absolute hot garbage. And, like, I think some people tried it with, like, Eagle Day, but no, this card is just absolutely terrible. And never saw play, never will see play, and is now gone. JU88 is being rotated. This card is very different than Dornier. This card saw a ton of play, mainly in German Italy control. Like, people tried it in other versions of German control, like German Britain control, Britain German control, but at the end of the day, this card really only found its place in German Italy control for a couple of reasons. One, it was an air meta, so a 4/6 fighter that gave you cards when your opponent threw tiny things into it. Very, very good. Air struggled to deal with this. You just prayed your opponent wouldn't have double JUs. And against other decks, like against Frontline, this could like eat a 5th Rangers and then survive. And then if you play Mary Nostrum on it, going up to 5 attack, the break between 4 and 5 is really big. The break between 3 and 4 is really big. So this was just like a beastly unit. It was also just a good unit to get Mary on. Because often you play JU, your opponent goes all face, and tries to just pressure you down, and then you play Mary, you heal for 5, you take something that often then lets you play that thing and trade out, or whatever. It just generated a ton of value. It made playing Soviets really frustrating, because you'd play cards like Naval Brigade, and then they play JU, and you don't have a way to stop them from taking your Naval Brigade for free. It's sort of just like better, not suppress, what's the other? Salvage. It's just like better salvage. And yeah, the effect was really annoying. Like, sometimes you just force steal something incredibly strong. On the flip side, sometimes you'd play JU and like Leopold, and then your opponent would play Partisans on the JU and kill the Leopold, and then they get a Leopold to hand while removing 2 of your units, and they'd win the game. So yeah, JU, it stopped seeing play after like the Mary Nostrum change and Air getting nerfed. Like, it was just a little bit too slow. And now it's gone. It might come back later. We'll have to see. Enemy sighted. is being rotated. I was like kind of shocked that this card came out in Legions when I saw this. I feel like that for some reason I thought this card was new. This card is absolutely terrible. Like it's just so slow. Destroy a target unit with 3 or less. That's like Flying Bomb, and Flying Bomb was really popular. And it draws a card. The difference is that costs 3 and this costs 5. And drawing a card is good, but it's not that good. This card is just really, like the turn when you want to be destroying a target unit with 3 or less is on turn 3, not turn 5, because your opponent will have a card that costs 4 or 5 on the board on top of the card that costs 3, and you're spending your entire turn to remove the smallest unit on the board. You're gonna lose the game. Yeah, this is just a really bad card. I doubt it's gonna come back. And last but not least, for the German specials, we have U48. The enemy cannot deploy units next turn. This card, I know a lot of people tried to make this work, but I never saw this work in anything remotely competitive. It's a really powerful effect. It's just really difficult to work into a German deck. And at 3, you couldn't, like, Leopold and then play U48, without, like, extra credits. It's just a weird card that, honestly, I think if they left this in the game, people would eventually find a way to make it work, but they've decided that it's probably a good thing for future card design to not have this in the game and not have to worry about, like, oh, is this going to break the game in combination with U48? So yeah, it's being rotated. Maybe they bring this back one day, like if they, you know, bring back like a sort of U-boat Wolfpack discard themed expansion. I could see that being like an interesting expansion to bring back this card in, but we'll have to see. And then we have Heinkel. This card is terrible. And if you watch my YouTube a lot, you'll know that I recently lost to this card in draft. But no, this card is absolutely terrible. And you know what's funny? This card came out in World at War. Germany got a Heinkel. And Britain got everything else. Germany also did get Zerstore, and Zerstore saw a lot of play, but, and King Tiger, which saw limited play. But yeah, Heinkel, absolutely terrible card. I feel like this card, like at 2, I feel like this card might be too strong. Like, it's just difficult to remove, and you suddenly just start snowballing on damage. At 3, there's probably a lot of decks in the game that this could be good into. That's not the issue. Like, the issue is it's a good card into some decks and literally absolutely unplayably terrible against, like, most decks. So, yeah. Heinkel never saw play, never was going to see play. It was a funny card when it came out, but, and, you know, there's the cult of Heinkel guys on Discord, but, yeah. This guy's gone and probably never coming back. Also gone and probably never coming back is Vespe. Vespe was an interesting card, came out in Theaters of War, and German tank decks were the most popular type of deck in the game. They'd been very popular, they'd been the best decks in the game, and when Vespe came out, I think a lot of people probably saw Vespe and was like, oh no, this is terrifying. The best deck in the game is now getting a 3/3 artillery. The issue is, it's not that simple. A lot of people tried this card. Like, this card, I think, saw play in, like, top 16 of Worlds in 2020. I'm sure it's seen play, like, once or twice in an OCC here or there. It's a card that looks like maybe you can make it work. Obviously, you could just play this in a full Heinz tank deck. You could also play this in, like, a combined arms joint operation type of deck as your artillery of choice. Because if you have a tank and you have an artillery, then you get +2 attack on the Vespe, but then also your joint operations or your combined arms get plus whatever. The issue is it's just so difficult to, like, run, you know, like, 6 or 7 of each type of unit in a deck. That's far too inconsistent, and in a tank deck, you'd rather just run more blitz tanks that can play blitzkrieg off of. That's something that the blitz tanks, like Heinz decks, have always struggled with, is you want all of your units in the front line for blitzkrieg or fast Heinz, so it makes running cards in the support line, like, actively bad. Like, running too many support line only cards harmful to your overall deck strategy. And, like, sort of this mid-range tank deck that could run Vespe and, you know, fight for control never really saw play. Like, it never really quite worked out. So, it was always a card that was close to being good, but never quite there, unfortunately. Then we have Stark 3 Schertzen, which I loved this card. I was a huge proponent of this card when it came out. And when it came out well before the pincer synergy stuff, like the Brother in Arms Ostracon regiment that, you know, that made Scherzen see a lot of play. Obviously, Scherzen has seen a lot of play recently in the pincer deck. But when the Scherzen came out, I was very excited for this card in Heinz decks, just because Heinz, up until that moment, the 3-cost tank they played was Flampanzer, and that operated for 2. And Flampanzer was a really good card, but it operated for 2. And I was excited to play Scherzen, where it doesn't have the, like, tempo effect of Flampanzer, but a 3-cost 3/4 heavy armor is really, really good. And it has 1 op. And that's really, really big, because it lets you, like, for example, you play it on 3, and then on turn 4, you push, attack, and, like, play a 20-second infantry or something. Huge difference that just push, attack, if it had 2-op. So I was very excited for this card. I played a lot of this card in Heinz. A lot of other people also played a lot of this card in Heinz as, like, a 1 or a 2 of. The issue is, I think, the Panzer 3G, the one that gives +1/+1 and blitz to your tanks, came out shortly after this, if I recall correctly, and then there was too many competing 3-cost German tanks to go into the deck, and the deck was largely built on the 1-cost German tanks. And, you know, if you could play this and give it blitz with the Panzer 3 G or F or whichever it is, you know, that was very good, but how consistently was that happening? This card sort of fell out of favor before the pincer deck brought it back. And again, they seem to be rotating a lot of pincers, so that's probably why this card is going. Then they have the 104th Panzer Grenadiers. Now, you might look at this card and think, well, this is just a card no one's ever played, and they're rotating it, and whatever. And you would be mostly correct. And like a month ago, I would look at the card and think the exact same thing. But I've actually been playing a fun German-US mid-rangey deck running 104th Panzer Grenadiers, and I really like the card. Like, the entire point of the deck was I looked at 104th Panzer Grenadiers in my collection and was like, surely this card is broken. Not, like, busted broken, but, like, surely there's a way to make this card really good. So I built a deck around it, and I'm having, like, decent success with the deck. I think this is another one of those cards that people slept on for years and years and years, and then when I saw it in the rotation list, I was like, oh man, I just figured it out. I just got this card, and now it's gone. Yeah, I think this card, the Combined Arms archetype just never really existed effectively until now. Obviously, there was briefly the British version, but that was far too aggressive to want to run this. But just a 3/3 with 0 op is decent. But yeah, it's being rotated probably just because it never saw any play. But I feel like that it does not necessarily reflect the power level of the card. Then, speaking of the Combined Arms Joint Operation deck, we have the Joint Operation being rotated. Sorry, Tree Pipit. This card saw a ton of play when it came out, but back then it could hit the HQ, and you would just play this as a burn card because very few decks had availability of healing. So you just like play this with Bismarck and Kriegsmarine and as just sort of your burst finishers. Then they made it unit only, and this card stopped seeing any real play outside of Tree Pipit decks. Just because if you're playing Combined Arm decks are typically more too aggressive to want to run Joint Operation. Usually Joint Operation's a little bit too win more for them. Like, if you have 2 units, 2 credits, deal 3 damage, it's good, but the issue is, like, Germany already has a lot of early game removal and tempo removal that this has to compete with, and you're competing with stuff like dive bombing or through the breach that might be more consistent, or things like sudden strike that are far more consistent but for specific units. And then you're also competing with not running any early game removal and instead just running more reliably hitting your early game units into Combined Arms. So yeah, this card, I would be kind of shocked if it never saw play. If it never came back. Just because this is a very interesting archetype that I feel like 1939 will continue to push over time in different ways, and I could see Joint Operation coming back in an expansion where Germany's archetype is this style. But yeah, like, for now, I think it's going to go away, and very few people are going to miss it. Then we have Rally. Rally was an interesting card. Rally used to suck, if I recall correctly. I forgot exactly what it was, but I think it was 3 credits maybe. Or maybe it used to not draw a card. That might have been it. I think it might have not drawn a card before. And nobody ever played it. And then they made it draw a card. Or 2 credit draw a card, whichever the change was. And then a lot of people tried it. because Pin was really popular, there was SSCD, so you'd run like Rally, and your opponent would play SSCD, and then you'd play Rally, push everything up Blitzkrieg, and win the game. Because your opponent like wouldn't play guards and whatnot, because why would you play guards if you can pin the entire board? So yeah, like, Rally is too niche of a card. The effect is really strong, even if you're not seeing Pin regularly enough. +1 attack this turn, draw a card for 2 credits is pretty good. Like, unless you can make some quality trades, it cycles a card. The issue is, like, this is not a 60 card deck, it's a 40 card deck, and this is not in the 40 best cards. It's in the 60 best cards for, like, something like Heinz, or German midrange, but it's not in the 40 best cards. And I don't think it was ever going to be in the 40 best cards unless Pin became very dominant. So this card being rotated, it's a little sad just for nostalgia's sake, but I don't think it's going to see... I don't think it was ever going to really see any play. Then we have Trop going. This is another Combined Arms style card, which makes me think that they're going to bring back Combined Arms in the future. Trop is a card that actually saw a lot of play. This was like just outside of the range of consistent competitive play, but it was always consistently like adjacent to competitive play, and it made it into a lot of tournaments in like one of decks where it's like, oh, that's an interesting choice. Because if you could play this as a 4-cost 6/6 plane, it's just really good. The issue is you can't consistently play it as a 4-cost 6/6 plane, but there's a lot of decks that can sometimes play it as a 4-cost 6/6 plane. Some people have tried this in Frontline, people tried this in Jagro, people tried this in Heinz, people tried this in like Combined Arms style decks. This saw a lot of play in a lot of decks. It's just, it was played in a wide range of decks, but it did not see a lot of play within those decks, if that makes sense, at the highest level. So this Trop going makes me think that they're definitely going to bring back Combined Arms at some point. Like, not the card Combined Arms, but the strategy of Combined Arms. Just because, you know, it's a very, very interesting effect. It's a popular effect. And it's a very Cards-esque effect. Like, you know, relying on the different unit types that behave differently. And deck building makes deck building really interesting. Then we get back to them removing a bunch of pincer stuff. 5th Panzer Grenadiers going. This card, when this card came out, it was Pincer Fury, and it was absolutely busted and made several decks insane. And then they decided that maybe giving anything in the game Fury is not a good thing. I remember complaining about this card from day one. I was like, 2 credits, give any unit in the game Fury is too good. So they decided to then make it into this effect. And this effect was absolutely laughably terrible because there was basically no pincer cards in the game, and there was no pincer synergy cards. This was the very first pincer synergy card. It came out ahead of its time. It was laughably bad. People tried to make pincer decks for about 2 minutes and then realized it was terrible. And then Brothers in Arms came out, and Brothers in Arms came out with a lot more pincer synergy, and people started to run like a couple 5 Panzer Grenadiers in these pincer decks, just because sometimes if a lot of stuff is pincered, you'd get a lot of buffs on a lot of cards. The issue is it's just worse than 101st, and it's kind of worse than Scherzen. So, can you afford to run this on top of 3 Scherzen and 4 101st? And then once Pincer sort of became less popular, this card went back into irrelevancy. But again, they just seem to be rotating all the Pincer cards, so that's probably all you can really take from that. And then they're rotating Iron from the North. I think they're just... we'll see a little later on, they rotate War Production. They also rotated... the Observer Core. I think they're just trying to rotate a lot of these credit cheat cards just because they're scary to have in the game. Iron from the North, I actually played Iron from the North in my 2019 World Championship run, but that was back when I had no cards. Like, I had basically no collection. I had played next to no competitive games. I had no idea what I was doing. And I had like a German Soviet all-in aggro deck because it was really cheap to build and really easy to play, and I was like, yeah, you know, just flood the board with try to hit the 554th Iron from the North, play a bunch of stuff on like turn 1 into Blitzkrieg on turn 3, quick win. Never really saw too much play. I don't think it ever saw any competitive play. Just because maybe like 1 or 2 people bringing just YOLO aggro decks and not performing well on them. The issue is if you don't hit this on turn 1, or with like a big hand of units, there's not a lot of refill cards. Like, obviously there's Enigma, but you can't consistently get Enigma if you're running Iron from the North because you can't run a Rados. And yeah, you just run into situations where your opening hand is like Blitzkrieg, Iron from the North, and you can't do anything. Or you play Iron from the North, and like your entire hand is cards you can't play. Or more Iron from the North, so you have like 12 credits, but nothing to do with them. Yeah, this card is a good thing it's rotated, just because, you know, free credit generation is a scary thing to have in the game. It makes designing new cards difficult, because you have to think, well, is this card going to break the game with Iron from the North? And I don't think that would ever really be the case unless they release some really stupid cards. But it was definitely the case with War Production several times. Obviously, War Production with the Swag, and War Production with the Jet deck, absolutely insane. And then they nerfed everything other than War Production, and now they're going to rotate War Production once we get to Soviets. It does make me surprised that they didn't rotate, not Nakshub. I know a lot of people wanted to see Nakshub gone. That one, if they rotate the 0-4s, they will rotate all the 0-4s at once. The fact that they're going after credit generation, and credit cheating does make me a little surprised that they didn't rotate the 0-4s, just because Pioneer and Nakshub. But I'm also surprised they didn't rotate the Geburgs Pioneer, the 1/1 Alpine guy that gives you a credit at the start of your turn, because that guy seems absolutely insane. And by seems, sorry, I mean that guy is absolutely insane. And that card has been asked to be nerfed since like basically the day it was released. And it's since then seen less play, but it's still in the meta. It's still ruining games. And if you're going to go after early game credit cheated, you should go after Geburgs Pioneer. Oh, and then last but not least, Jaeger Regiment. This card went from seeing no play to seeing a ton of play, when sort of the Combined Arms Hummer, the Heinkel change made people realize Combined Arms was cracked, and people started to play this deck a lot with Jaeger Regiment. Then people play a lot of Jaeger Regiment in the Pincer deck, obviously, and since then it made people realize Jaeger's actually a lot better than we thought it was, and it's sort of seen some play in even just Heinz decks since then. So this is one of those cool, like, sort of sleeper cards that we slept on for a long time, and then sort of realized its potential, played with its potential a lot, and now it's time to go, along with most of the other Pincer cards in the game. And last but not least, we have Lost Convoy. This one is weird to me, because they're bringing back most of the countermeasures that they had previously removed from the game. And as we will see when we take a look at the new expansion cards, the Germany is getting like countermeasure themed cards. I think the reason they rotated this one is just because it costs 0, and you can trigger a lot of them immediately. And the credit, like, they might just be worried about, you know, you using this. You don't care about the effect at all. You're using this to trigger as many countermeasures as possible, as quickly as possible, to get out to your win conditions for the countermeasure deck. So they probably were a little worried about that, or just didn't like that style of using this card, and rotated it respectively. Then we get on to Japan, and Japan is losing Kika. And Kika is a card that has seen a ton of play, and I've talked a little bit about cards that I think were sleepers, like cards that were really good and people didn't see play. I think Kika's the opposite. I think Kika's a really bad card that saw far more play than it needed to. And sorry, but not a bad card. Like, it's a fine card for what it is. But as Kika was played in so many decks, it had absolutely zero right to be played in. And now it's gone. I wouldn't be too surprised if it came back at some point, but like, yeah. Let me elaborate a little bit on what I mean about the Kika. So when Kika first came out, it saw a ton of play in Japan-France Resistance. And that was because that was a deck that was already using Last Rites, and I think Kawanishi was in the game by this point. Yeah, I think Kawanishi was I think Kawanishi had come out in the previous expansion. So yeah, they were already doing Last Rites Kawanishi stuff, and when Kika came out, it was like, oh, this is a perfect fit. It's another card that goes alongside Shiden as a card that can burn the opponent in the face, and then it dies, and it rotates Kamikazes into your deck, which fits your Fatigue game plan, and it also fits your additional burn with Kawanishi game plan. And it was really good in that deck, and saw a ton of play in that deck. And then they nerfed Resistance into the ground. And people were like, oh, Japan Control's unplayable. And then when Japan Control started getting different options with different allies, like, you know, there was some Japan-German control, there was some Japan-Poland control, people were like, oh, Kika. Kika was an elite that was very good and run in previous versions of Japan Control, not thinking whatsoever about why it was run in Japan Control. So, Kika was thrown into decks that didn't run Kawanishi and didn't run Last Rites. And the Kawanishi Last Rites is a whole other conversation, because I saw a lot of decks that would run Kawanishi and Last Rites and Kika, and they shouldn't be running any of those three, because their deck did not have the draw consistently to reach the bottom of their deck to then make those cards good. But Kika, it's just hilarious. Like, in OCCs, you can go back and watch the VODs. There is countless players who, and possibly myself included, I'm saying that I was definitely running Kika when I should not have been running Kika. Because if you think about it, how is it different? It's just it's 2 credits more than Heian for +1/+1 and the destruction effect. So if you're running this just for the burn, run Heian. 2 credits is substantially cheaper. Like, that is a very big deal. It's a 10 credit turn versus an 8 credit turn. Very big deal. For +1/+1, not worth it. Now, are you using the destruction effect? The answer is no. Like, people play this in Japan, Poland Legions, and then they lose a couple turns later because they need to spend a credit on playing the Kamikazes out of their hand to get to the cards they actually want to, and then by the time they find them, they've spent too many credits on Kamikazes to win the game. Legions is not a burn deck. Kika should not be in Legions. Plain and simple. So yeah, anyways, this diatribe aside, the Kika is a card that just baited a lot of people in Japan Control, and I'm sure there's a lot of people looking at this that are like, oh man, Japan Control is getting some tools, but Japan Control is losing Kika. Kika's not a good card in Japan Control. Be thankful it is gone, because we are no longer all collectively baited into playing this card. Also being rotated is Last Rites. I'm very happy about this. Last Rites the Kamikazes used to cost 0, and it was broken, and then they made them cost 1 and stopped seeing any play until people figured out how to make Japan-France Resistance really good. Me and Ari Big Ben Ari Big Ben played this in a tournament towards the end of 2021. I think it was October or November OCC 2021, and I saw the deck perform, and I was like, wait, this deck looks insane. And it was a deck that had been in the game for a while and had been around for a while, but just in different versions, and I think it had been brought to tournament once before, but it was seen as sort of a meme deck. But I saw Ari Big Ben play it, and I'm like, that version of the deck looks incredible. So I copied the deck, I played it in the next OCC, it was insane, and then I brought it to Worlds, and then I won my first World Championship with that deck, and actually was so popular, and I tested it around with my teammate Darkness. He also had that deck, and infamously, our Game 5 of the Grand Finals was a mirror match between these two decks, with Last Rites being one of the core cards of that list. And when they went to nerf the deck, because they saw World Championship come down to a mirror match, and they were like, this is awful. This is terrible at branding and advertisement. We need to nerf this deck. I said they should nerf Last Rites. They should make Kamikazes cast when drawn instead of get shuffled into the deck and cost credits. Because 1, you can't set up massive burn turns with Kawanishi unless you go down to empty deck and then play Kawanishi Last Rites, draw a card, and you draw all 8 and deal a bunch of burn damage and make it into a combo deck in that way. But you stop preemptive setups with that. You stop the 12 damage setup with Kawanishi, with Kika, and you stop the fatigue. That was the biggest thing, and that was the biggest reason why it took people a long time to realize how good Japan-France Resistance was. Is Japan-France Resistance, a lot of decks could heal out of the burn, and then you would lose. Or you would draw so many cards that you would kill yourself on the draws from the Kamikazes while trying to go for the burn strategy. What it took people a really long time to realize was you don't need to go for the burn strategy. You can just win on fatigue because you add 12 extra cards to your deck with Kika and Last Rites, and then you don't play them. And then you win the game on fatigue. And that's something I'm sure there's thousands of people who lost games that they would win if they just kept passing, but instead they went for Last Rites and started playing the Kamikazes and lost. So yeah, they had said butchered Long Range Recon. That's a whole other story. The deck became unplayable. Last Rites became unplayable just because there's not many other options to draw through your deck consistently enough to want to play Last Rites. But anyways, I think Last Rites should still be reworked to cast when drawn. I think that would just be a more interesting effect rather than this fatigue blocking. Also, they nerfed Night Witches because fatigue blocking is bad, but Last Rites is perfectly fine to exist in the game because the devs did not intend it to be fatigue blocking. and I guess don't think of it that way, despite that being its best use case. But anyways, it's rotated. It will probably come back because it's an iconic card. But if it ever comes back, I'm not going to complain, to be completely honest. Japan Control has other options. It has probably better options in the game right now. And this strategy is not particularly fun to play against. Also going is Lightning Conquest. This is one of those cards where it was like, for a while it was like in the base set of cards, and then for a couple expansions after that, it was sort of like one of those card 40 flex cards in Jagro, where like, you know, there were situations where you could play Lightning Conquest and pop off. But there was also a lot of situations where you could play Lightning Conquest and it doesn't accomplish much. And people would, like, you know, occasionally try to make this card work. I'm sure it has seen tournament play, but it was never, like, a core card of any deck. People tried to make it the core card of, like, some meme OTK decks, but those were never serious. And now it's gone, and, you know, this could come back in the future, could not come back in the future. Either way, I don't think it's going to be much of a difference. They just needed to pick a card to go. And then they have Southern Play, and I'm so happy this card is gone. Make this card never come back. This card is terrible. And obviously, it has seen less play, substantially less play, since they rotated Errado. A lot of people were doing Errado into Southern plans as the only orders to guarantee the credit denial. Last expansion, Errado's coming back, but Southern plan's gone now. Since that point, people were doing the German-Japan mid-range decks with Southern plans that you just, you know, play them in your deck and mulligan. And, you know, if you find them and can play it on turn 4 going first, you win the game like 90% of the time. That was after the Observer Cord. If back in Observer Cord land, this card was insanely broken. Yeah, this card is just toxic. It makes the game very difficult to design around. And people were just continuing to find ways to run this card because it's just such a powerful effect. And I think this became a bit of a bait card. I saw a lot of people playing Southern Plan in decks that I'm pretty sure just actively made their deck worse by putting Southern Plan in it. But sometimes when it worked, like, it made the deck worse, but when it worked, it made the other person's experience terrible. Losing to Southern Plan is one of the worst things in the game because it prevents you from playing the game, which is not a good thing to do in a card game. So yeah, I'm glad this card is gone. May it never come back. Also going is Naval Supply Run. Now, and Naval Supply Run's an interesting card because for a long time, this card was not played in Jagro. Like, it was just sort of seen as bad. Like, it was occasionally played in Air and occasionally played in Hines, but nobody played this card in Jagro because they just thought Jagro had better options. And then also, they definitely stopped playing this card once they moved on to Feigned Retreat because you'd run a Errado Feigned Retreat with as few orders as possible. So you definitely don't want Naval Supply Run discarding a random card. But then once they rotated Feigned, people sort of came back to Naval Supply Run and started playing it more and more, to the point where it became a staple in the Brothers in Arms Jagro deck, and then that deck got gutted by that rotation. But then it came back in its changed form with Naval Supply Run, again being a very popular card in Jagro and the German-Japan aggro deck. They're playing it. Even some people are trying it in German-Japan mid-range deck. It's just a very powerful card. It's a very flexible card. And they're rotating it. I would be a little surprised if it never comes back, because it's just a very interesting card that I think is relatively well balanced. But in the meantime, while it's gone, maybe we can see people trying out other AoE buff cards, like maybe For Prosperity, which is coming back this expansion, maybe Calm Before the Storm, which has not seen any play since they nerfed it to 4 credits, but, you know, maybe the game slowed down enough to play this card. Maybe now that supply shortage is gone, it's better. Maybe people go back to US Ally and start letting We Can Do It and Alliance more. I don't know. There's a lot of different options. Very excited to see what this, alongside the rotation of Monsoon Rot supply shortage, is going to do for what buff cards people choose to run in the coming expansion. Also gone is Elusive Force. This is a card that saw very little play, just because there was no deck for you to really run this in. People tried to set it up with weird decks, but often it would just result in you losing a card. And cards, like individual cards in your deck in Cards, the game, are very, very important in Control. Like, Control often comes down to just who can grind out the other person on value. So running a card like this is very, very low value, and it's very difficult to find a situation to play this card in a deck where it's going to be high tempo. So yeah, I never really saw play. They also rotated the unit equivalent of it in Germany, the U-48. I think they're just trying to lower down the number of uninteracted, like, cards that prevent the opponent from interacting. We see the credit denial going, we see the cost in hand going, we see these cards going. Maybe they'll come back, maybe they're just, like, sort of realize that they want the game to look more like other more popular card games that don't have a lot of these solitaire-esque mechanics. And then last but not least for Japanese specials, we have Burst of Fire. I'm incredibly happy about this. I have been complaining about Burst of Fire since probably Allegiance, if not before the first expansion ever in Cards. This card is just incredibly broken. Like, this card is ludicrously broken. I have probably made, like, on, like, 5 separate occasions, written, like, a short essay on why Burst of Fire needs to be nerfed. And now it's gone. And I kind of hope it never comes back. Or if it does come back, it comes back at, like, 3 credits. Because this card is ludicrously powerful. And we've never really seen a meta evolved around it. Like, this meta, the Winter War meta, is, like, the closest we've seen Burst of Fire played a lot. But it has been meta adjacent for a very long time. It makes decks like Tony OTK playable. I've played versions of German Japan Burst of Fire midrange, like, since Breakthrough, because I was playing it with Goshikins. You'd play Goshikin and, like, FWs, and if your opponent leaves a unit on board for a turn, you'd play Burst of Fire. Very similar to what we're doing now, like, 4 years later or whatever it is. It's actually kind of funny. And yeah, Burst of Fire was just such a big burst card. That just made it really toxic game states, whereas, like, if you leave a fighter up on the board for 1 turn, you could just lose. And it also made it very difficult to balance blitz fighters. I also hate Comet. I want Comet nerfed more than I want Burst of Fire nerfed. But you'd run Burst of Fire with Comet as just free 10 damage from hand. Well, not free 7 credits, but, you know, relatively free 10 damage from hand. Yeah, this card, absolutely nuts. And yeah, I hope it never comes back. Alongside Burst of Fire going is Tony. I think this one's fine because Tony saw a lot of play in a lot of, like, slightly off meta decks. Obviously, we saw Tony in the World Championship. But Tony is exclusively playable because of Burst of Fire. So if you're rotating Burst of Fire, Tony becomes completely unplayable. So I think it's fine that they are using a Japanese rotation slot on Tony alongside Burst of Fire, just because it's fine. Also, Tony is just one of those really weird cards where it doesn't trigger countermeasures. And if you're having a countermeasure expansion, you know, if you leave Tony in the game, the number of people complaining about Tony not triggering countermeasures is going to spike. So, you know, just get this card out of the game. It's just a weird card. It's not incredibly clear how it works based on its card text for new players seeing this card for the first time. So, just sort of, like, you know, streamlining the game a bit, taking out the weird cards. I kind of hope it never comes back just because it is a really weird card, but, you know, I wouldn't hate it. Then we have the Type 1 Chaihi, I don't know. This card never saw any play. This card is absolute trash. Then we have Outflank. This card also never saw any play because it's also absolute trash. But for a different reason. Like, I think people maybe tried this one, and, like, at lower ranks where people were getting, like, bodied by things like Churchill, people definitely play this card. It's just that not every deck plays guard units. Like, some nations don't even have access to guard, like US. So you don't want a card in a refined tier 1 deck that sometimes is unplayable against certain nations. And also, even if every nation did run guard, like, Honorable Death is just 2 credits cheaper and will kill almost every guard, and also it will kill things that aren't guards. So there's just more flexible, cheaper, higher tempo options that affect a wider range of units. So Outflank never saw any play, and now it's gone. The Ki Ni, this is another card that never saw any play. It's just really weird card, but 2 health, no blitz, or 2 cost, 1 health, no blitz, just made this card unplayable. People, like, tried it in just all-in, fully aggressive, for prosperity type of decks, but no, it never worked. Then we have Sakura. Sakura also came out in World at War, interestingly enough. Sakura has always been, like, meta adjacent. It's seen limited amounts of play for periods of time, because as a 1-cost card, a 1-cost 3/3 infantry, very, very good. Now, it's not always a 3/3 infantry, and sometimes it not being a 3/3 infantry doesn't matter about how you build your deck. It just matters whether or not you go first or second. So you don't want a card that is substantially worse going second. Now, obviously, sometimes you do with cards like Geberg's Pioneer, but this card doesn't win you the game if you go first, unfortunately. And then the other thing is it has 1 operation cost, and that's the big sticker. It's 1 operation cost and doesn't have Blitz, so it's going to take 2 turns and also 2 credits to get this to the front line, where it can then cost another credit to do anything in the game. So needing to spend 3 credits over 3 turns to use this card just does not make it a good enough aggro option. You would rather play Cavalry, where it takes 1 credit and 2 turns to interact. Yeah, this is just too slow. But again, like, it's another Japanese 1-drop, so it's seen limited amounts of play where you just want a more consistent 35T, or you want to be able to hand dump faster, or whatever it is. Then they also have the Type 1 37mm. This card saw a very limited amount of play when they changed Ancient Empire, so you could more consistently get below 10 health. People also tried it out in self-damage. I think this card used to do something else, and then they changed it to its current effect, if I recall correctly. But it never saw play beforehand, it never saw play afterwards, either way, if they did change it. It's just, like, it's just kind of worse than Katyusha, because Katyusha is basically just this card, but you don't have to be at 10 health. So yeah, it's just a weird card. The weird archetype. I'm kind of surprised that they aren't rotating the whole archetype, to be completely honest. Or maybe they already have. I don't even remember if Ancient Empire's in the game. Then they're rotating 6th Infantry Regiment. This guy's kind of just like a vanilla dude. Some people tried to make this work in, like, Japan-US infantry-based high buff attack things, because if you get this guy, then you play, like, Unity is strength on it, make it a 6/6, and then you hit face for 12 for 0 credits, but that deck never really worked, because otherwise it just gets traded out by Cavalry Regiment or something like that, and then, you know, it's not a good card. Deadly Duty is being rotated. Deadly Duty is a card that has seen more play. I never liked playing Deadly Duty in Jagro. Some people, back, like, before the monolithic feigned retreat list, there was a lot of debate between running Deadly Duty or running expansions, because they're both 1 credit, draw 2 cards. Expansion, obviously, you don't have to kill your unit to do it, but on the flip side, Deadly Duty could trigger destruction effects. And Deadly Duty can draw you cards if your opponent has the front line, so it's a little more consistent. If it is a net tempo loss. So there's a big debate about this card versus expansion back, like, in Classic. Now that we are here, it's very clearly expansion is the better card, at least in the current game, and I don't really see that changing at any point. So Deadly Duty is being rotated, and I kind of doubt it ever comes back, just because it's very difficult to make a metagame where this card is good. It would probably require rotating expansion, and I kind of feel like expansion is just going to be one of those core cards that never gets rotated. And then they're rotating New Doctrine. This card was played in, like, Frank OTK, which was never a real deck. The one interesting thing I can say about this card, while setting up to make this video, is if you search up New in your collection, New Doctrine does not come up. You can type NE space Doctrine and it will come up. You can type NE space W space Doctrine and it will come up. But if you just type in the word New, or type in the word New Doctrine, like New space Doctrine, it will not show up. I think they made a bug. I think there's a bug in, like, whatever the search engine thing, like the tags or sort of the hidden data for each card in the collection with this card. And yeah, now it's being rotated. That's the only interesting thing I can say about this card. Sneak Maneuver is also being rotated. This is a card that there's a very brief window of time where I didn't play cards, and it was right after Allegiance dropped. And I know that in that period of time, the best deck was the 0 operation cost Japan-Soviet aggro. I don't know if they played this card or not. This card came out in the same expansion, and is obviously meant to be played in the 0 operation cost deck. It's just this card is so terrible. Like, it's such a low impact card that I find it difficult to imagine that they played this card even in the 0 op cost deck. But, you know, maybe they did, you know, if you played Cards back then, this would be like early 2020. If you played Cards back then, let me know. But since then, at least, this card has seen zero play. It's just too slow. There's, like, better ways to attack a unit. Buff the attack of the unit. It's not worth the card slot at all. It's a huge tempo loss. It's not that much of a tempo win, and it's a huge value loss for your deck. Speaking of value losses for your deck, we have Reorganize. I love this card. I've tried to make this card work so many times. I've come so close to bringing Reorganize to OCC and just like a beam deck just to try to make this card work. And I'm very sad it's being rotated. I hope this comes back at some point, because this is a very fun card. The reason it's terrible is it's basically a mulligan. It's like a free mulligan that puts you down one card. And there's not enough card draw in the world to make put yourself down one card mulligan good. Now, obviously, there's some world where you try to run this with Sakura Regiment, where you try to have a small hand size to get the attack buff. You try to run this with stuff like Edge of the Empire, where it shuffles your entire hand into your deck and then draws. So your hand size, having no cards in hand, makes the card better. And then later they just have stuff like Take Liberty that also works like that. The issue is you just have all of these cards in your deck at once, then your hand is like Reorganize, Take Liberty, Edge of the Empire, and you play Reorganize and toss the Edge of the Empire, and it brings back like a second Edge of the Empire, then you play the second Reorganize and toss that back into your deck, and then you come back with the second Take Liberty, and then you play Take Liberty and draw 4 cards, and you just spent 4 credits to destroy 3 cards from your deck, and now you have 4 cards you started the turn with a 4-card hand, you end the turn with a 4-card hand, and now you just have 3 cards left in your deck. So, yeah, this card was hilariously bad, but it was fun to try to make work. Then we get on to Soviets cards. Soviets are losing minority recruits, and this is going to be a theme. Soviets are losing a lot of their Steal Your Stuff cards. Possibly all of them, although I'm not positive. There might be some worse ones that I'm not thinking of. But they're losing they're losing minority recruits. This card basically never saw any real competitive play. It's just a little bit too slow. And I think it came out at the same time as Partisans, or Partisans came out very shortly after Minority Recruits, and Partisans is just far better Minority Recruits. It's not even close. Also, at this time, the only real big unit that you would be willing to spend 10 credits to take control of was Tiger IE, and that card could not be targeted by orders. So yeah, Minority Recruits is just not that good of a card. It never was. It was too hard to get up there, and then by the time you did get up to 10 credits, you just had better options. The rotating T28. This one, I feel like it might just be because, well, 1, it's Pincer. They're getting rid of the Pincer. And 2, this card had so many bugs. I actually lost an OCC 3rd place match, game 5, because of T28. My opponent, Darkness, played Confusion on my T28, and the Pincer didn't break. The Pincer's supposed to break because it leaves my battlefield, but the Pincer stayed around, and then he traded the T28, which put it into his deck, and then he used it to, like, stop, like, 5 draws of Fatigue, and then he won on Fatigue by, like, 2 health, or something like that. So yeah, this card, it was fun to try to make it work. Sometimes you would pick it off of Heroes of the Soviet Union to do like these big swing turns where you get like a second 272nd or a second Naval Brigade or something. You delay yourself on Fatigue in a Fatigue control matchup. But nobody really ever ran this in their deck just because it is too slow, and there's very few matchups where you want to run this in your deck. And like you never ever hit the situation where you have like the engineers on board and you keep playing T28s and trading for 2 damage, heal 2, and then it goes back onto the top of your deck and you go infinite on it. That never happens. So yeah, T28 is gone. And these should have been in the other order. But 39th Rifle Regiment is also gone. This is another, it's technically a World at War card. This card did not come out with the World at War expansions. This card came out as a free skirmish card for everybody a little bit afterwards. This card was absolutely insane. I did not want this card to be released in its current version, and then they released it, and it was never nerfed. But this card is just absolutely broken, and I say this as somebody who loves Soviet control and probably plays more Soviet control than anyone else in the game. I am glad this card is gone, and I hope it never comes back. This card was just too good. There was so many times we're playing with Soviet control or playing against Soviet control, it was just like, if 39th Rifles is played on turn 5, if it comes down on curve, the Soviet player wins the game. Just period. It was not worth playing around if you're playing against it, because it's just such a powerful effect. And it was a card you would often keep in mulligan in a lot of matchups, even though it's a 5-drop that might not even do anything. It was just that good. And yeah, so this card is going, part of it is just because your steel stuff seems to be going, part of it is because it's absolutely broken. And yeah, I will not miss this card. I absolutely hate this card. And I think this is probably the most recently released card to be rotated, because it did actually come out substantially after the main World at War expansion cards. It's that, or there's one other Soviet card we'll get to. Onto the specials, we have KV2. KV2 is actually a big hit, not because of itself, because basically nobody has ever played this card in their deck. And it actually used to be worse. It used to have 4 health. And I think it also just couldn't be pinned. Like, I think when it came out, it was Heavy Armor 2 cannot be pinned, and then they added the cannot be attacked by artillery or air units, and then I think they added it from 4 health to 5 health. They might have done those 2 things at the same time. Maybe it came out with that original text. I can't be positive, because nobody ever played this card. This card was just not good. This card was just hilariously bad, because it died to a tactical strike. And then it goes up to 5 health, but it's, it still just dies to a hammer. This card was just really, really bad. Where this card was really, really good was off of things like Ural Factories and off of things like Red Banner. And there is one other 7-drop in the game. There used to be 3 7-drops. ISU used to cost 7 and have a different effect. And then there's the 7/7 infantry. I forget if that's been rotated or not already. But nobody ever plays that guy. But you can no longer upgrade a 4-cost tank into a KV2 because KV2 is gone. So the 7-cost tank tier is gone for the upgrade things, and that's probably the biggest impact that this card disappearing is going to have. Next is Partisans. This card is insane. This card has... so many conversations about possibly nerfing this card have gone around. Just because when Soviet control was more popular, this was often a 2-of in it. And it just made playing other unit-based control decks really, really annoying. Because you'd play 2 units and then your opponent would do Partisans and 2-for-1 you. Or they would do Partisans, trade, and leave 1 unit alive, and then play Red Banner and 3-for-1 you. And there was also specific breaks. Like, you could do Partisans Red Banner on Leopold and get a King Tiger and win the game. You could do Partisans Red Banner on Lancaster or Churchill Offray against Britain, and you get the 7/4 Blitz Bomber guaranteed to close out games with Burn. Partisans was just incredibly powerful. Sometimes you just played Partisans on turn 6 and on a unit that had operation cost, just as a 6 credit would turn a unit to hand, because sometimes that was just good enough. Yeah, Partisans, ludicrously powerful card. Also, the best of the steal your stuff cards. And yeah, this card going, it hasn't seen play recently, just because Soviet control has slowed down, and even within Soviet control, this sort of became a 1-of, and sometimes you ran no Partisans, just because you had better options, and also a lot of people played around this. There was few situations where they'd have 2 units on board, and if they did, those units would have 2 op costs, so then you need 8 credits to play this card effectively. So yeah, I think this card got worse over time, and also now it's gone. Then we have Order 227. This card is laughably terrible. Why would you ever play this card instead of playing counteroffensive? I do not know. This card could cost 0 and it would still be bad. Then we get onto the limiteds, and they are losing No Surrender. This one actually really surprised me. Now I could see losing a card like Motors, the 2/5 guard that gives light infantry +1/+1. The No Surrender nerf surprises me, because tokens in Winter War, tokens received a lot of support, and they became a solid deck for the first time. They saw real tournament play at Worlds. It performed really well. It saw a lot of play on ladder, and then it sort of dropped off. People realized that it was just not consistent enough, and then also it relied heavily on one very broken card, which they then nerfed. And then even with the most recent buff to Baronovici, it's still just not quite good enough. Like, you'll lose to it on ladder from time to time, but it's just not good enough to be played in tournaments. And losing No Surrender, this is one of the best cards in the deck. This is going to drastically hinder tokens. This is just going to be the nail in the coffin of tokens becoming a competitive tournament level deck anytime soon. But, you know, maybe that's fine. Like, you know, tokens had its time in the sun. No Surrender is an incredibly powerful card. Maybe they rotate it. Maybe they bring it back later with more token support. Maybe they release a new tokens support card that, like, replaces No Surrender and would have been too strong with No Surrender still in the game. We'll have to see, but this definitely caught me off guard. This card used to cost 4 and not give them Blitz. It used to just be 4 cost, fill your support line. And then when they made this change, I remember they made this change while tokens was unplayable. And a lot of people complained that this card change sucked. They were like, this is a nerf, because you get your light infantry 1 turn later now. This card is terrible. And I remember just, like, I got into an argument with several different people about this, being like, no, they were like, this card's a nerf, this change is a nerf. No, I was like, no, absolutely not. 5 cost to give them Blitz is insane. And, you know, history ended up proving me right. This card was so much better than the 4 cost version. This was a card, like, almost single-handedly made tokens, like, tier 2 before Winter Warfare, or Winter War came out. Then we have Amur rotating. This one I'm very sad about, because if you watch my stream, I have recently been playing a lot of T-34. I actually hit top 10 on ladder last month, in large part with T-34. So they're now rotating Amur, and, like, they're not rotating any of the other T-34 cards, which is really weird to me. They're just rotating Amur. I'm kind of sad about it. I hope it's going to come back in the future with more T-34 support, but maybe it's going to be like Spitfire. Like, maybe they just saw the tribal decks of Spitfire and T-34 as just, like, not working out, and they're slowly removing them and making people forget they existed. I'm very sad about this, though, because I feel like T-34 was, like, one more support card away from working, and, like, maybe it's, like, a tier 2 deck currently that people were sleeping on, but we're never really going to know for sure, because in a month from now, Amur is gone. Then we have Ziz. Ziz is an interesting card. Ziz saw a lot of play in artillery back when the Arty deck was strong. And then they nerfed the Arty deck, and then it continued to see play, and then they nerfed the Arty deck a second time. And then it fell off the road a bit. It was played in, like, some decks just to give things Blitz in certain combo decks, but it's a little too slow. Like, stuff like Caddy OTK, you don't need to play a 4-credit give something Blitz. You can just play a 2-credit has Blitz card to set up lethal combos with Great Patriotic War. So yeah, this is just a weird card. Again, it's Pincer. They're removing Pincer. But also, the ability to give any card in the game Blitz is something to be worried about when just for future card design. So this does open up some more options. Then they're rotating Confusion. Again, they're rotating the Steal Your Stuff cards. Confusion is an interesting card. Confusion came out in an expansion before Partisans. And when Confusion first came out, it saw a ton of play, because it was the first card of that type. And also, it was just really good. The game was slower. It was slower in a weird way. Like, it was slower, but, like, every deck played 3 drops. So Confusion was very, very powerful. Like, it was consistently useful against basically every single deck in the game, and just destroyed certain decks in the game. And, like, most Soviet controls ran 2 or 3 copies of Confusion. And then they nerfed, Partisans came out and people continued to run that, although they dropped off to, like, 2 copies or maybe 1 copy of Confusion. And then they nerfed the Ural Factories and the Red Banner from 1 credits to 2 credits and made Confusion substantially worse, because then you needed to be able to play it and then trade it out, and that was not always easy against a lot of decks. And nowadays, Confusion really doesn't see play. Like, maybe you see one of, sometimes it's like a tech card in Soviet control. It not being in the game again, or it not being in the game, it's a little sad, just because this was a really fun card. It was an iconic card. It's a good thing that you don't have to, like, play around this card anymore against Soviet controls on ladder. But yeah, I kind of hope that they bring this card back at some point. Like, if they never bring back Partisans, I'd be fine with that. I think Confusions is, it's a lower power level, it's more balanced, and I also, in my opinion, is a little more iconic of a card. Then they're rotating Second Rifles. This is just a card that saw very limited play I played this card a little bit in Soviet Control like years ago. I also played this a little bit in Soviet Control much more recently. 3 for a 3/4 body, not great, but not terrible for a guard. The 4 health guard for 3 is really, really bad, but the 3 attack makes up for that because that guarantees trading out whatever trades with it. And then it's tax +2 attack against units with Blitz, and a unit with more 4 health or more, except for Sherman, is going to have Blitz. So this trades with Schutzen, this trades with 5th Rangers, this trades with Hellcat. Hellcat obviously doesn't have 4 health, but like this is just a good card that trades 1 for 1 with a lot of things, and sometimes trades for 2 for 1. Never saw as much play as I think it maybe deserved. But then Bryansk Regiment came out, and why would you ever play this card when you can play Bryansk Regiment instead? So yeah, it's being rotated. I kind of doubt it's ever going to come back. Then we have Stand Fast. And oh boy, Stand Fast is a silly card. Yeah, Stand Fast came out in Theaters of War, and nobody played it because it was a really bad card. I think the idea was you would play this on like a guard unit that you didn't care about and never intended to operate with, just to make it really big. And no one ever did that because like your opponent would just like play Sendai Regiment and then you 2 for 1 yourself or something. Or they'd play Leopold or Half Track or whatever. They'd just retreat the card and then you'd lose the effect. And then the next expansion afterwards, they released Bolster. And suddenly Standfast got a lot better because you could play Standfast and then you play Bolster, and that's a 2-credit, or not, sorry, a 2-card combo that gives any infantry or tank unit in the game +10/+10 plus whatever their op cost was before in stats. Excuse me. And sets the op cost to 0. So, yeah, that combo was very scary. People tried it. I think it maybe saw a play in tournament once. Was not nearly consistent enough. There was just better things you could be doing, especially because I think shortly after that they buffed counter-offensive and we entered counter-offensive meta, which was just a better 2-card combo. It was a cheaper 2-card combo that won the game faster. So yeah, Stand Fast, I don't think anyone's really going to miss it. Then the 461st Rifles. I've never seen this card played outside of draft or people trying to complete play ambush cards mission. This card costs 5, which is hilarious. There's a different 4-cost 5/3 ambush Soviet infantry that nobody plays, that I always confuse this for, and that's basically all I've ever thought about this card. This card is just awful. Terrible, terrible card. And then we have Suraj Gate. Suraj Gate also might be like one of the most recently released cards, just because, again, this was I believe, actually, maybe this wasn't a, I'm trying to remember whether or not this was a card, for just like one of the cards they released with the weekly, game mode. I'm blanking on the name of it. But either way, Suraj Gate is one of those cards that it came into the game, and people basically immediately figured out that this card was just not good enough to be a competitive tier 1 card. It was too easy to play around. Pin in Soviets is not worth that much. You would rather play like a 3-cost card that destroys a unit of your choice rather than a 2-cost card that typically wouldn't kill anything. It would deal 4 damage and pin a unit, but you'd rather kill one thing than do 3 things, none of which result in the unit dying. But what this card did do was generate a lot of memes of people misplaying because they wouldn't play around Suraj Gate on ladder in closed to deckless situations, because they would, never expect anyone to play Suraj Gate, and you never really play around the placing units adjacent. And also, it's a really weird card to play around. Like, even if you are thinking about it, it's difficult to think which card would my opponent rather pin, and which card would they rather deal damage to. So yeah, Suraj Gate is just a really funny, thought exercise, but it's not a real card that we saw real play. Speaking of not real cards that saw no real play, Hasty Reinforcements. This card is just hilariously bad. Also, for a long time, it would give Blitz to units that already had Blitz. I think they changed that. I'm not positive, though, because nobody plays this card. Just the fact that it's just, it costs the credit to do something you are not sure what it's going to do. So, yeah, 1 credit units you deploy or add this turn get +1/+1. That might see play in tokens. 1 credit, give units you deploy this turn Blitz. It's just worse pattern, but, maybe you could still run that. 1 credit, give units you add or deploy this turn ambush, nobody's playing that unless it's a like OTK deck with the double ambush damage guy. So it's just the fact that it's not consistently doing one thing. You can't build your deck around it. There's just better buff cards for tokens. Also, like, tokens runs a lot of cheap order buffs. They have a lot of options. This is the worst of all of them by a wide margin. So yeah, this just never saw any play. Kamenskaya, this is like sort of the core card of repair, just 1 credit, repair all friendly ground units. Very powerful. However, never really saw play because repairing ground units was never really a necessary or interesting like effect that you wanted to do. And also, the Soviets lack so much card draw in almost every Soviet deck that you can't really spend a credit repairing ground units. Like, that's not enough of a thing to do to justify running a card in your deck, like spending a card slot in your deck on Tomanskaya. Then the rotating 554th Rifle Regiment. This card has seen a ton of play in a lot of bad decks and a lot of like subpar decks, but most recently of which in a good deck was run in the Germany Soviet Jet deck, just because it's a 0-cost 1/1 blitz. You know, if you can get a bunch of them in the front line in like a sort of all-in YOLO aggro blitzkrieg deck where you can get like 4 units to the front line on turn 1 and try to win with an early blitzkrieg. Other than that, it's kind of like some people experimented with this in tokens, but the issue is it's not a light infantry. So yeah, this is just like one of those weird cards where like people would also play this in Japan's Soviet aggro, just all in, where, you know, you'd get like 4 blitz units to the front line on turn 1 and then try to draw the infantry, get +3 attack on the next turn. You could theoretically kill your opponent on turn on turn 2 with these cards. Never happened as far as I saw, but you could technically do it. Yeah, I'm kind of glad that they are removing this card. This is just one of those cards that it's, again, limits design space. 0 credit cards often limit design space. Speaking of 0 credit cards limiting design space, War Production. Oh boy, War Production saw a lot of play in a wide range of decks, and basically how you would run War Production is you would mulligan for War Production and any amount of cards that are not additional War Productions, and then you would play 3 credits worth of cards on turn 1, and then you would try to win the game based on that tempo swing. That is how War Production worked. In Arty, it also had the added benefit of you running supply chains, so you would not only would you be cheating free credits, you would then also be generating more supply chains for card draw. But yeah, War Production is just one of those absolutely busted cards that is going to come back in some sort of tier 1 broken deck every time there's new cards added to the game, because something the devs don't think about being able to be played on turn 1, such as a swag or a 64th Panzer Grenadiers. So yeah, this card I'm so happy that this card is not in the game anymore. Then last but not least, we get on to US. US is losing B-17F. This card never really saw too much play. The B-17F, like, it very briefly saw play in some US main ramp decks, but those were never popular, and they very quickly realized that this is just kind of worse than B-17 Flying Fortress, because 1, some things just have more health than 6, 2, you can't blitz this card out until you've hit 12 and then ramped beyond 12, and 3, again, they cannot be targeted by enemy orders, often wouldn't matter, because if you're playing ramp, control decks would often just lose to you anyways on, like, you would just try to outgreed them, so you wouldn't need to run this type of card in that deck. You would just win by playing more high tempo cards that you would eventually just win because your cards are bigger than your opponents, and they aren't building their control decks around being able to deal with multiple big bombers. So yeah, it was just kind of like it's miles better than the Flying Fortress, which I think came out before this. Not the Flying Fortress, the Super Fortress. The B-17, the B-25 Flying Fortress, or Super Fortress. Miles better than that, don't get me wrong. It's just, you know, nowadays you see this card out of mass deployment, and that's basically it. Then they have Long Tom, which is one of the worst elites in the game. How this card was never buffed is a mystery to me, and how it's taken this card this long to be rotated is also a mystery to me. It has an amazing name and a terrible effect. Why would you ever spend 5 credits on a 4 health unit that is never going to survive? Ever. Yeah. Long Tom, my only real other thing to say about Long Tom is I once tried to make a Long Tom OTK deck. I think that might have worked. I forget exactly. It was in a special, like, a random OTK style event that I was playing in. But yeah, no, Long Tom, bad card. And this being gone is good for all new players because it means that they aren't going to randomly open a Long Tom in a pack and waste an elite. Also going is Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike probably saw the most play out of the last these three elites, B17F, Long Tom, and Counter-Strike. This one was saw play in like not every US control deck. It never saw play in like Frontline, but like anything slower than Frontline, Counter-Strike saw a lot of play in those types of decks. The issue was it was slightly worse than Air Defense because it was more telegraphed, and it was also easier for your opponent to not easier, but it was just as easy with Air Defense as your opponent to trigger it with something that's not a big unit. I think where this card probably saw the most consistent play was Unitless. This was just another one of those cards you would play in Unitless, and it's the two countermeasures that you would use to try to destroy Comet, because those are the only ways you could destroy Comet, because the entire rest of the deck is just targeted removal for cards on board. So yeah, Counter-Strike. I'm glad that they removed Counter-Strike and not Airstrike. I much prefer Airstrike, or not Airstrike, Air Defense, sorry. The 2-cost elite countermeasure. But yeah, it is kind of weird to me that they're doing a countermeasure themed expansion and removing Counter-Strike, one of the more played countermeasures in the game. Then we get onto the specials, the removing Corsair. Corsair is an interesting card. Corsair has not seen any play anywhere on ladder. Like, I don't see this deck on ladder, which is weird, because you see a lot of, like, sort of the cards that used to be good and aren't good anymore on ladder, like, all the time. I never see Corsair on ladder. Have not seen it in tournaments in, like, probably 4 years. But before that, like, in the first set of expansions, like, after 2 expansions, Corsair was incredibly popular and was a 2-of in basically every US main or ally ramp deck, and there was a lot of them. Corsair was just really good because it would trade 1-for-1 with the other big stuff. Like, your opponent plays a B17 and it hits Corsair, then Corsair hits B17. Or, you know, your opponent plays an Avenger, kills your big guy, you play Corsair, and now your opponent has to trade Avenger into Corsair, and then Corsair also kills a big guy. It was just basically, you guys just go back and forth, play these big cards with destroy enemy unit text on them, until somebody ran out of cards or stuck a unit for long enough and would win the game. So I played a lot of Corsair back in like 2020, and saw a lot of other people play Corsair a lot in 2020. The issue is everything else was a deployment effect. Corsair is a destruction effect. So as the game sped up, people would you play Corsair and then they would just flood the board and go face. And then, you know, 4 attack is often not enough to kill their highest health thing. So you'd have to attack into the highest health thing to kill your Corsair, but without even trading 1-for-1. And then your Corsair would die, and then the destruction effect would hit a random unit on board. And often that was just really bad. Also, you would have to play this on turn 6, and often you would kind of dead on turn 6 if you're playing Corsair in your deck, because you play it and it does nothing, and your opponent goes entirely face again. Then we have M4A1. This is also another card that sees no play anymore. And I never see it on ladder, but when it came out, saw a ton of play, because draw this unit from your deck if the enemy makes you discard. People started playing discard. I'm partially to blame for this, but people started playing like dedicated discard decks for the first time around this time, after M4A1 came out. So people started just putting 2 M4A1s in like a lot of mid-range decks, because, you know, if you're just playing mid-range cards, M4A1 on its own is fine. Can't be targeted by enemy orders is a really strong card text. Like, that was the most popular and the most powerful card text in the game at the time, and people started to play a lot of discard, and this would just be the ultimate anti-discard card, because they play Wolf Pack, draw you 2 M4A1s, you play M4A1, and then they can't remove it, because you can't annihilate it. So yeah, this card was just really, really popular. It was really popular in Bolster. It was popular in Counteroffensive. One of the reasons it was popular in Bolster is when they released the Befelswagen, which is the 2/2 tank. When you take the front line, play this card from your hand into the front line. when that card got released, there was a bug where it would consider it discarded, because it would consider the card discarded from your hand and then added to the front line. So it worked exactly the same way as it currently works and how it was intended to work. The difference is it would draw M4A1s from your deck. So there was about a 2-month period before the devs decided to patch that, where everyone on ladder was playing US German bolster and drawing their own M4A1s on like turn 2. It was really, really dumb. Also, this card was great with bolster because you'd play it on turn 4 and then you'd bolster it on turn 5, and you would have a 6/7/0 op cost tank that your opponent cannot target with orders. And tank is the best unit type back then because everyone was running like 3 copies of Half Track, which again doesn't target tanks, and then all other retreat cards were order based. So yeah, a 6/7 M4A1 unkillable. But then, discard saw less play, bolster got nerfed, and better options started to come around. And now, like, even in anti-discard decks, you have to be really teched for discard to want to run M4A1, just because it's a little too slow. Like, just a 4/5, 2 op cost body can't be targeted by orders. It's just not good enough at the moment. Even if you can consistently get it drawn for you against discard, you'd just rather be playing better cards in your deck than M4A1. And then we have rotated Red Devils. I'm very excited about this. I'm very happy about this. I did not like Red Devils when it was released, and I'm a little surprised that it never got nerfed. Red Devils was a ludicrously strong card, and I also think they've done a good job at giving Frontline enough options to survive after losing Red Devils. It's going to be a big hit to Frontline, do not get me wrong, but, 164th is really good. Greyhounds are really good. We'll have to see if there's any new cards that Frontline gets, any more 1-cost guys. But even just 4 Greyhounds for 164th, that's enough to continue to run a solid Frontline package. The biggest thing is it's losing an infantry, which makes 35T in Frontline worse. Because if you're losing Red Devils and you previously lost the 32nd Infantry, or 34th Infantry, the 2/1 that would draw 4 copies of it, you've now, for the first time, Frontline has sort of lost its real common consistency. I suppose back when it was Combat Engineers Red Devils, that's the same number of infantry as you have now. It's just the difference is 164th often dies, whereas the other 2 did not die on turn 1. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Frontline works with Red Devils gone, but I'm just so glad Red Devils is gone. It's such an annoying card. And I feel like this card might have been holding back a lot of decks like Heinz or Heinz adjacent, like more aggro decks. Like, Soviet aggro, not tokens, but just like Soviet aggro. Soviet has a lot of good aggro cards. They have a lot of good blitz cards. It's just all of them sucked against Red Devils. So yeah, we're going to have to see what the meta is going to look like, but maybe this opens up the field of possible things that other nations can play. Then we have the M4A2. This card came out in World at War. This card, I think everyone kind of realized before it came out that it was too slow. And it's just sort of like a win more greedy card, but it's just too slow for Frontline. Like 4/4 2 op, not good. And it's too slow for ramp because they don't have guard, they don't have blitz, they don't have additional destruction effects stacked on them or anything. It's just sort of a bad card that didn't really fit anything, and never saw any play. But a World at War card that did see a lot of play was 5th Rangers. 5th Rangers, what's funny is a lot of people didn't think 5th Rangers was going to be that good, because at the time, Frontline decks were running, I think it's 1st Marines. It's the 3-cost, 3/4, 1-operation Blitz Infantry, that when it enters the Frontline, your HQ gains smokescreen for a turn. And people saw that and looked at 5th Rangers and was like, this is... On the one hand, this is 4 credits, turn 4, you can push a 3/4 to the front line. 5th Rangers, 4 credits, 4/4, you push a 4/4 to the front line. The difference is you can play the 1st Marine, or the 1st Marines, you can play that on turn 3, and then push it on turn 4. Whereas 5th Rangers, you can't. Turn 4 is supposed to be your Sherman turn. So yeah, a lot of people actually saw 5th Rangers and were like, this is worse than 1st Marines. Maybe you run both, but this seems worse than 1st Marines. And then people who were playing it, and they were like, okay, maybe this is slightly better than 1st Marines. And like some people would, like, run a couple of both, or they'd cut 1st Marines and put in like 1 or 2 5th Rangers. And it actually took a couple months for people to realize that, like, actually no, 5th Rangers is just insane, because yeah, 4-cost 4/4 Blitz 0 infantry. It's pretty good. Like, if that was just what 5th Rangers was, it's pretty good, and I think there's a debate that 1st Marines maybe it's better. However, the fact that later in the game it turns into an 8/8, and it gives frontlines so much staying power in the games they would otherwise have just immediately lost. Like, Sherman no longer being the biggest unit in your deck is such a big swing for frontline that, like, now on turn 8, if you're low on cards in hand, you can just send an 8/8 to the front line, and a lot of decks can't immediately deal with that, and then maybe that sticks in the front line, and lets you Sherman. Or maybe it gets removed, but it trades out, like, 2 big units that would have otherwise sat in the front line and made you lose the game immediately. Now 5th Rangers trades out with them because it's an 8/8, and then it allows you to take the front line and Sherman. So 5th Rangers, huge card. And it being rotated is interesting because US has gotten a lot of good options that fill similar roles. Maybe not necessarily US specifically, but just looking at their ally, Germany. People have tried Schützen in frontline. People have tried, obviously they are trying and continuing to play Panzer Grenadiers, the 20th Panzer Grenadiers in frontline. Now, obviously, those aren't US units, but if you run those and then lower the curve for frontline again, because the issue with running Schützens is you're like, you really want to run 4 Shermans and 3 5th Rangers and 2 Schützens. That's a lot of 4 drops. Now, maybe you lower the curve a lot, and you cut 5th Rangers and maybe put in more like 1, 2, 3 cost US cards, and then for your 4 drops, you rely on Schützens, and then you try to just, instead of just using the staying power of 5th Rangers, you try to, like, outspeed your opponent. Or maybe now that Monsoon Rod's gone, you slow the game down a lot and try to just win with unkillable boards that you just grind your opponent out with We Can Do It. Because that's how what Frontline used to do before 5th Rangers, is you'd run 2 or 3 copies of We Can Do It, and basically just try to create these huge high health boards that your opponent can't trade out the units on, and you eventually win. So yeah, I'm very excited to see how Frontline's going to look. And they were losing Hour of Need. They lost War Bonds in one of the rotations, and then they recently brought War Bonds back. And now they're losing Hour of Need. I don't think this, like, this is big, but Hour of Need wasn't seeing a ton of play, and I'm glad that this is gone. At the time I complained about it, I said you should have rotated Hour of Need instead of War Bonds. 1, War Bonds is the more iconic card, I think. 2, War Bonds gives US some optional draw for US main things. And 3, it created really stupid games where your opponent would do turn 2 War Machine, turn 3 Hour of Need, turn 4 win the game. Like, if they just hit the correct, like, 2, 4, 7 in their hand. Now that they are forced to delay their second ramp card until 5, so they do War Machine, play something else, War Bonds, or they do War Machine, like War Machine, but in that case, you're down 2 cards, it messes up your curve a lot. That one's fine. But yeah, I'm just glad Hour of Need is gone. And it looks like we might be getting some interesting ramp options in the new cards based on what we are seeing. So I'm excited to see what those will be with the new covert. Then we have P38 Lightning. And P38 Lightning is an interesting card because this is a classic card. This has been in the game for years. This was before any of the expansions. P38 Lightning was in the game. I think it used to do +1 attack, and I think they buffed it at some point. I forget exactly when they buffed it. But before, this card never saw any play, and then they buffed it, and it continued to not see any play for a long time. And it was really like a year and a half ago when people started playing Britain-US Ramp. Or, sorry, Britain-US Air. And I'm pretty confident it was Noen. Noen was the first person to start playing this card, and when people saw him playing this card, the first reaction was like, P38 Lightning, nobody plays that card. That card's bad. And then they saw him play it and was like, actually, that card's pretty good. Like, yes, it's not RAF. Like, it's not the RAF Lightning. It doesn't have a deployment effect that's really strong. And it's not a British air unit. But a 4-cost 3/5 fighter is very difficult to remove the turn it comes out. And its effect is really strong, especially in combination with things like HMS Illustrious. Or if you already have bombers on board, you can do P38 Lightning attack for 3. That's a lot, especially because 3 was the big number, because CAS was +1/+1, so you could get 2 attack bombers, so you'd get like a 3 health unit. But if you can play P38 Lightning to go up to 3 attack, then that could often be the difference between your opponent keeping a unit in the front line or not, which is the difference between you keeping your Swordfish alive or not, which is the difference between you winning the game or not. So I've continued to try to make this card work in Hermes decks, because I absolutely love Hermes, so I love playing Hermes with P38 Lightning. I'm very sad to see this card being rotated. I feel like this card was not seeing enough play and not good enough to warrant being rotated because of its power level, but it was seeing enough play that I don't think it's warranted rotating because nobody's playing it. So it's a little weird to me that they are choosing to rotate it. But I hope either it comes back or it means that they have cards that do similar things or fill similar roles that they want people to try out instead of P38 Lightning. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe my Hermes decks are just catching strays here. Then we have the 155mm model, or model, I don't know. This card is absolutely atrocious. This card is hilariously bad. This card is awful, 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 has never seen any play in anything, and nobody will miss it. Speaking of which, we have Texas Infantry, which all of my previous description of the model can fit Texas Infantry. This card is hilariously bad. If you play this card, and then you gain 2 credit slots, like you play this card and then you do War Machine, you just played a 3 credit 4/4 2-op. There's a 3 credit 4/4 1-op vanilla infantry in the game. So you have to gain at least 3 credits after playing this, and it costs 3, and you can't just play it on turn 3 because it will like get pinged or hit by a 35T or whatever. So you like need you need 9 credits, and then you need to play Texas Infantry and then play War Machine, and you get an 8/8. And also you just ramped yourself to 12. This card is terrible. Absolutely terrible. Then we get to the standards and the rotating Second California. Now, Second California is a card that I'm sure a lot of my viewers hate. A lot of people absolutely despise this card. Like, basically everybody short of, like, the top of Field Marshal hates California. Because it's absolutely a powerful card. It's a huge swing card. It's a tempo swing. It can just delete something in the front line and leave behind an annoying body. And if your deck doesn't have really good removal that you know how to effectively use, Second California plus, like, We Can Do It, you just win the game. And people used to do that back. Like, California's gone through several different iterations. But using California with We Can Do It or Unity as strength to just create this massive unkillable guy was a very, very popular deck, and like tier 1 deck. And then it sort of fell off. They set it to its current version, and it saw basically no play outside of Pauper tournaments. Inside Pauper tournaments, it was king. But outside of Pauper tournaments, it saw no play until like a month ago, 2 months ago, in my most recent OCC. I just decided to bring Second Californias in ramp. And I got second. Did I win? I don't even remember. But I did really well with Second California and ramp, and I think it opened people's eyes to, like, oh, maybe it is still playable right now, because, you know, there's not a lot of hard removal in the meta right now. Maybe this is like an interesting meta call. Then we're moving California. I think maybe the idea is just they were worried that if they nerfed they were rotated 5th Rangers, that people would just go back to California. Because before 5th Rangers, that's what people were playing as well. It's because they would run First Marines and Californias as sort of their top end. And then, you know, they switched to 5th Rangers and cut the We Can Do It and added more early game and the Blitzkriegs and whatnot. But yeah, it's an interesting choice to rotate this card. And I'll be very interested to see if it ever comes back. Because on the one hand, it's an iconic card in Cards history, and it's a really powerful effect that's not broken, but good enough to warp metas, or like, influence metas. On the other hand, a lot of people hate this card. So maybe that they will just rotate it and never bring it back just because a lot of people do genuinely despise this card. So yeah, we'll have to see. Then they have the 26th Infantry Regiment. No one has ever played this card ever. This card is hilariously bad. They have Helldiver. No one has ever played this card. This card is hilariously bad. Actually, I'm sure a lot of people have played this card because this card is really funny. You can, like, try to fill your hand with Helldivers. When I first, like, after this card had been in the game for like a year and a half, I'd never seen anyone play it, and one day I was just feeling inspired to try to make a Helldiver deck. And which is how I discovered that this has to be on the board for it to trigger. I thought it triggered in hand. Like, I thought it would fill up in your hand, and then you can, like, flood them all out at once. This has to be on the board? This card is so bad. And also, like, it has 2 op. If this card had 1 op, maybe it could be, like, a tier 3 deck. but 2-op, this card is just absolutely atrocious. Then they have Firewall. This is another card that came out in the sort of the post World at War releases in the skirmishes. That's what the mode is called, the skirmish. And this card is one that I kind of wish they had never printed. It didn't see a ton of play, but I saw play in one specific deck, Britain-US unitless, where basically you would just try to Firewall 4 units in the front line, and the rest of your deck was just healing and card draw until you eventually killed your opponent with orders from hand. And the idea is, if your opponent can't remove their own units, and you never play units for them to trade into, Firewall just limits your opponent's frontline spot to 1 spot. And a lot of decks, that immediately ends the game. Now, obviously, if you're playing like a deck like Air, it's worse because they can like Firewall something in your support line and then you push it to the front line to make room. And if they don't Firewall it, they can just hit face from the support line. So Firewall was a card that was just, against some decks, it immediately won you the game. Against other decks, it was not that good. But also, it was never really clear what was Firewalled. Like, you'd have to, like, hover over the card and wait for the text to appear, and then it was, like, at the bottom. Yeah, it was just a weird card. It fit one solitaire deck. It was not fun to play against, and it doesn't really fit the card's UI particularly well. So I'm glad this card's gone, and I hope it stays gone. Then they have the 112th Infantry Regiment. Nobody has ever played this card. However, we have seen this card a lot because of Skytrain. Now, you might think, like, okay, this card's gone. Nobody ever plays this 1-drop, whatever. Frontline still has Greyhound. They still have 164th. Why would we care? Well, if we go back here, all the way back here, Red Devils is also going. So if you've been following the game, you'll see a lot of people have been complaining about Skytrain pulling Jasko. And that's because they rotated a lot of 1-drop infantries in the last rotation without adding any new ones. So it lowered the total pool. I think it went from like 9 to 7, I think. So 1 in 7 times Skytrain will give you a Jasko. They are removing 2 more infantries from this pool. This is making Skytrain unplayable. If they don't introduce, like, at least 1 really good infantry, probably they need 2 really good 1-cost US infantry in this expansion, Skytrain's going to become unplayable. Like, it's completely unplayable. Even now, people are cutting it because it's a little bit too inconsistent, and also there's a lot of suppress going around, and if it gets suppressed, it's really bad. If they rotate these 2 cards and don't introduce any new ones, they are effectively rotating Skytrain, which makes me a little sad they didn't actually rotate Skytrain, and wait until they bring it back with a more variety. Because, yeah, at the moment, they're just slowly stripping Skytrain of its variety and leaving mostly the bad options behind. Especially, like, this and Red Devils were 2 of the better options. Because otherwise, there's the 1-3, which is pretty good. The other 1-3, the non-1 Blitz 1-3. And then there's, like, the 2-2 infantry. And then there's Jasko, which is atrocious. And then there's the 1-1 that buffs adjacent units that can often be hard to use. So yeah, this card going has a shockingly large impact despite no one ever playing this card. And then last but not least for US, they are losing Naval Task Force. I played this card in draft sometimes, and very, very rarely I saw this card played in like L640 decks, but since the L640 nerf, those have kind of disappeared. So yeah, I don't think this, I think this is another one of those like whatever rotations where it's like, I don't think it's a big deal. And it doesn't fit a theme. It's not like they're rotating all of the choose 1 effects. I do hope they release more choose 1 effects in the future. I think that's an interesting card design to go down in the future. But yeah, that brings us to the end of the US cards. So now we get to the Ally Nation cards. So the only French card to be rotated is Expeditionary Corps. Deployment, add a resistance card to the enemy hand. This card was nerfed a long time ago and then never played again. And it is one of 2 resistance cards in standard rotation. And now it is gone. So that means there is now 1 resistance card left in the game. And it is Arming the Resistance, which doubles the number of resistance cards in the opponent's hand. Which is really funny because it is the worst one to leave behind. It is the one that most requires other resistance cards in the game to use. I don't know why they didn't rotate that card with this one. It seems really bizarre to leave 1 resistance card in the game, and it's that one. But yeah, I mean, no one was playing resistance anyway, so, like, I guess it doesn't really matter. But onto Italian cards, they're rotating Decisive Defense. Now, this is one that has seen no play in the last, like, 6 months, even, like, 12 months. It hasn't just really been seeing a ton of play. Because, one, the game sped up a lot, and the Germany-Italy lost root out, which was the big card making one of the cards that made Germany-Italy able to compete with aggro. Outside of Germany-Italy, not a lot of decks were playing Decisive Defense. They also lost Lurking Danger, which was one of the reasons to run Decisive Defense as an extra countermeasure to run Lurking Danger to draw cards. So this card wasn't seeing a ton of play. Also, the 7th Alpini being hit, the release of Devil's Brigade, making 7th Alpini impossible to play in the meta right now, is another hit to nobody playing Italy Control, which leads to nobody playing Decisive Defense. Again, a little weird that they're rotating this card in a countermeasure-themed expansion, but I suppose they just want to limit the total number of countermeasures in the game, just because if you are a newer player, it's really, really annoying to try to remember all of the new countermeasure. Like, every time you see a new countermeasure, you're like, oh, I have to remember that. What nation is that? How much does that cost? What's the triggering condition? Then they're also rotating Desert Push. Nobody has ever played this card, ever. It is just absolutely garbage. So yeah, this is just one of those ones where they have to rotate a card, so pick the least played Italian card, probably. Then they rotate Polish cards, I think for the first time. Maybe not for the first time. Maybe they rotated like one in the last time. But they're rotating 3 Polish cards this expansion. They are rotating Hell. And this is a very interesting one, because when this was first announced, a lot of people looked at this. I think this came out in Uprising. When a lot of people saw this, they were like, oh, this card's kind of bad. Like, this never makes the cut for the 12 cards. Like, if you could run 20 Polish cards, maybe you would run this. But how does this ever make the cut for 12? And then, shockingly enough, it actually began. I think it was Noen. You can trust Noen to run weird cards like this that eventually people realized were really good. And it was in US Poland. And it was because US Poland had no Intel cards in US. And all of the ones in Poland were really expensive. Like, you would run the 3-cost Karas that then gives you the 2-cost, whatever that card's called. And then you'd have the 4-cost Underground State. Those were all very, very expensive and really, really slow to use with Tarnow. However, if you could use Hell, it could be a 1-cost trigger on Tarnow that would then give the effect to the legions spawned by Tarnow, even if you had no other legions on board. And at minimum, that was pretty good. But if you got it on one legions currently on board, even if you didn't have Tarnow, you would just use this. It makes your legions, like, you play Plan West, play Hell, they're now 3/3s. And then you play, like, We Can Do It, they're now 3/6s. That every time it survives combat, whether you attack it or your opponent attacks them, it gets +1/+1. Suddenly you just have, like, 2 unkillable legions that are going to take the front line for the next, like, 4 turns and let you do Sherman, California, whatever. Unity is strengths. So this was just a really good card, and I've been playing a lot of legions in the last couple of weeks. I've been playing a lot of this card, trying to see what nations this card works in. Often it's a one-of in, like, US Poland. Still, I've tried it in Japan, Poland as a one-of. This is a very interesting card. So seeing this card get rotated, it's a little sad because this card was interesting and did lead to deck building decisions when playing legions. Then they're rotating Daring Strike. Daring Strike's an interesting card. This used to be an Intel card, and it never saw any play. And then they changed it to an Exile card, and then it never saw any play. And then they released Hammerhome, and now people sometimes play this card as just really, really bad, like hitting the 12th Polish slot, burn because sometimes it costs 0 and can take out like a 35T that is otherwise threatening one of your Exile units or something like that. It's not, even in Exile, it's not that good. Like, even at 0 cost, it's not that good, and it's taking up Polish slots. So that tells you how good this card is. Exile getting hit by anything, I'm happy with, because that's the only card Exile is getting hit with by rotation. I'm kind of surprised they didn't rotate Sea Patrol, for example. But yeah, that's going. And then the last card is a card that, honestly, I forgot was in the game until I saw it on the rotation list. It's the PZL P7, a 1-cost 1/2 Blitz. Whenever an enemy unit moves into the front line, retreat this unit. I think it's supposed to just be like a ping over a lot of turns, sort of like the Soviet artillery, but infinitely worse. And that brings us to the end of the rotation. So all in all, what's entering the game is a lot of big elite cards. We have the 3 researches and desperate measures, and then a lot of interesting control options like with the Takasagi, but not a ton of aggro cards. And then what's leaving is Frontlines getting hit really hard. Jagro's fine, to be completely honest. Tokens is getting hit shockingly hard. Then the mid-range decks aren't getting hit that hard. Like, the German Japan is losing Burst of Fire and it's losing Southern Plan, and those were certainly run in a lot of them. And all the German decks are losing Jaeger Bomber. But, you know, like, the German US deck's not losing that much. Honestly, I kind of expected FW to maybe get rotated for a little bit, just because of how much play it was seen. And I thought maybe they would think it was, like, sort of stifling it. But yeah, all around, I'm very excited for this rotation. There was no notable misses, I think. Like, there's no one deck that's, like, completely... There's no tier 1 deck that didn't get hit at all. There's no one nation that seems to be left with absolutely nothing to do anymore. Like, arguably Soviets is, like, the biggest thing, because they've lost their best elite. They didn't get anything from rotation, and they lost the best card of their only, like, tier 1, like, not even tier 1s, like, tier 2, but, like, they lost their best elite, they got nothing new from rotation, and they lost the best card of their best archetype right now. However, you know, Soviets aren't bad right now because all of their cards in the collection are bad. They're bad right now because of what is good. So we'll have to see what meta appears after this. We'll also have to see what new cards Soviets get. But all around, I think this is a very good rotation. I'm happy about this rotation. Just a reminder, if any of these cards are in your collection and they are getting rotated, you have the choice at any point to like, destroy the cards, delete the cards from your collection in return for crate progress. So if there's a card that you think is never going to see play again, or there's a card that you never played originally and, like, would never play even if they brought it back, you can destroy those cards in return for crate progress, which will then let you get more of the new cards, or let you get closer towards crafted whatever deck you want. So don't take this video as a guide for that. If I said this card's never coming back, I don't have any insight. I'm, like, any special behind the scenes insight. I'm just saying what I would do as a game developer. So don't be like, oh, he said this card's never coming back, so I'll immediately uncraft it, and, you know, maybe it comes back 6 months from now. Don't get angry at me if that happens. But yeah, that is it for me. Thank you very much if you got to the end of this long video. I know this video was very, very long, but I expect many of you will not finish this in a single sitting, but rather, you know, reference it for specific cards or sit through it in multiple different chunks. I never got around to doing my rotation list for the last expansion's rotation, so I definitely wanted to come in here quick, do this one first, get this one up immediately, and subscribe if you haven't already, because you can expect card reviews for the new cards as they are announced, and hopefully I will have a reveal of my own to do at some point in the next couple weeks. So thank you very much for watching if you got to the end, and I will catch you in the next one.